Howdy, and welcome to another episode of Adult Onset Horsemanship. I'm your host, Daniel Dolphin. Our guest today is Miss Katrin Silva of Katrin Silva Dressage. She, of course, trains dressage, but also Western and Western dressage. She currently lives in the vicinity of Santa Fe, New Mexico. Katrin is a native of Germany and more eloquent in writing than most native English speakers. She is also an ultramarathoner and legit badass, in my opinion.
Welcome.
She is the author of Ride with Feel, A Guide for the Rest of Us, and Dressage for All of Us. She believes riding is a two-way conversation, not just a series of imperatives directed at a horse. We need to have the same expectations and cultivate the same qualities in ourselves that we want from the horse. Katrin is not a highly competitive rider in believing that that's what validates her training and her career, but she has won the USDF bronze medal. She's a 2022 SFDA high point in third level dressage, 2022 AQHA reserve world champion in level 3 Western dressage, as well as the 2022 AQHA bronze champion in level 3 Western dressage. She has had such mentors as Conrad Schumacher, Christine Traurig, Debbie McDonald, Bill Woods, and Bill McMullen, and especially wants to thank Nicole Thunger. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
It has an umlaut in it, Daniel.
What's that?
It has an umlaut. It has the U. So it's German. Yeah, that good, okay. Good
job. And Nicole is a German master level trainer who has been working with Katrin for over 20 years. So, Katrin, how are you doing today? It's good to see you again.
It's good to see you too, Daniel. I'm doing great.
That's wonderful. You're telling me, as we were talking before, y'all are finally getting some rain in your neck of the woods. I think in New Mexico, rain in the summer would be pretty welcome sight.
It is. It smells beautiful here in the desert, and I just feel really lucky to be here. I mean, it's a beautiful sight.
So in Germany, I'm not really familiar with the terrain, but I'm thinking of a more mountainous, forested sort of a country, certainly in a colder climate than what you're in right now. So do you prefer the desert or deep dark forests?
Oh, I prefer the desert. Oh my God. Yeah. And, I'm from like a hilly, green part of Germany. It's pretty. It's by the Danube River. But I have to tell you, I came to New Mexico when I was 19. I had a tourist visa. I was just going to, work on a ranch for a couple of months and learn something. And then I just never went home. And that was, that was 33 years ago. So yeah, I love it here.
Well, I'm glad you stayed. Well, we start off every guest with the lightning round questions just to sort of break the ice. And Katrin, these are for points. So you want to be on your A game because there's prizes at the end.
Okay.
If you were a Jedi, what % chance would there be that you would use the Force inappropriately?
There'd be a pretty good chance. I think the temptation would be humongous. Yeah, I'd be a very bad Jedi. I'd go to the dark side.
Okay. Morning or evening?
Morning, but not early morning. If I get to sleep until 7, I'm totally fine.
That's fair enough. Do you have a favorite way to treat aches and pains?
Oh my God. Advil and a glass of wine.
What kind of wine do you like?
Vinho Verde from Portugal. It's like frizzy, light. It's perfect for summer.
Sounds good. Bay or sorrel?
Oh, that's a tough one. Currently Bay. My current favorite is a Bay guy. So yeah, Bay.
Okay. Does pineapple belong on pizza?
It does not.
Okay. And I'm thinking you're European, so yeah, that adds a whole new layer to this.
I lived in Italy for a year. It's it's like, yeah, he's like, you can put it on pizza, but in New Mexico we put green chili on pizza. Now that goes really well. That's like a marriage made in heaven. Pineapple, I don't know.
Not so much. Are you a cook? What's your favorite meal to cook?
My favorite meal to cook, gosh, I do this lentil thing that's like that looks like a pizza, and it's actually kind of good for you, but it doesn't taste like it's good for you. So yeah, you'd probably like it.
Okay.
And
So like the lentils are the crust, or how does that work?
yeah, it's like you cook red lentils, and then it's like you put some vegetables and some bacon pieces or whatever, and then you grate some cheese over it and some tomatoes, and then you broil it, and it tastes like this amazingly delicious pizza, but it's red lentils. It's really good.
Okay. Well, I
I
actually
can see you're skeptical. I can see you're not a
no,
lentil guy.
no, I actually don't mind them at all. I have gout, and so one of my worst
Oh,
triggers is beans. So any sort of dried bean, like lentils,
okay,
would,
so that's probably not for you.
yeah, that would be 10 days of unable to walk for me. So I would, as much as I would like it, I would have to avoid that. If
Oh, that
there,
sounds horrible.
it really stinks. Let me tell you, I'm learning my triggers more and more,
Yeah.
and sort of managing it and all. But you definitely have to alter your lifestyle and don't just get to do what you want to do. But I guess that's all part of aging anyway, right? Or
Yeah, that's yeah, it is.
if there are good essential oils, do you think it's fair to say that there must also be evil essential oils?
That is a really fair question. And yeah, I have some friends who peddle essential oils, and I always roll my eyes. It's like, yeah, that's Santa Fe woo woo. And I'm sure they're not terrible for you, but yeah, I just can't bring myself to use them.
I'm with you. I'm quite skeptical of that. So,
That's an interesting question. I'm going to have to ponder that. Yeah.
do you
I'm going to
have?
have to come up with an evil essential oil.
Yeah, it's got to be maybe catnip or I don't know. Do you have a
No,
horse?
no, my cat would disagree with that.
Well, I don't like cats, so that would be the deal. It draws in the cat.
What?
Yeah,
Okay,
my wife.
Daniel, this podcast is over right now. Oh my God, how can you not like cats?
They're too indifferent. Like as the saying goes, you own a dog, you feed a cat. My wife and my
Yeah, the
youngest
cat
son.
owns you.
Yeah, my wife is a avowed cat person, and that's one of the biggest differences between us is over the cats. So, uh,
I can see my husband started out that way as an anti-cat person, and now he's a bigger cat lover than I am. So, there's hope for you. Took 20 years, but there's hope for you.
well, I occasionally come up. We had a cat called Smokey, and Smokey was my cat. She loved me. She slept on my pillow with me. She was mean to other people. She would attack other people, but she would follow me like trail rides in the pasture behind the horse, just like the dogs would. When I would give lessons and stuff, she would jump up on my shoulder like a pirate's parrot or something, and I would walk around with her on my shoulder. So every once in a while, you come across a cool one, but she was unique, I would have to say. Do you have a horse industry related pet peeve?
Oh gosh, a horse industry related pet peeve. I have a dressage related pet peeve, and that is that notion that dressage people walk around like they're better than other horse people, and that they have invented that they have access to the holy grail and nobody else does. And I'm like, nah, that's bullshit. There's a lot of ways to get things done, and there's a lot of truth out there that comes from all sorts of directions and all sorts of traditions. And so dressage people just need to live with that and just talk to other people and just step off their pedestal. So that's my biggest pet peeve.
I like it. Do you have a favorite beverage?
A favorite beverage, probably coffee.
Coffee. Okay. I
Yeah.
would not say I would not have thought you do not seem like a low energy person. So I would think you get a couple cups of coffee in you and you would just vibrate in place or something. That's not true.
Nah, you should see me at 6 in the morning. I mean, it's like, yeah, and until the coffee kicks in, that's low energy.
Would you tell us something unexpected about you?
Something unexpected about me. I bake some really good German Christmas cookies. And I don't like to tell people about that because I have my badass reputation to protect, but I do. And they taste really good.
One of the things I liked about you, we were doing lunch at the Best Horse Practices Summit, and they had the table of desserts, which most people were avoiding. And you walked right up there and grabbed three cookies, and I happened to be standing there. You turned around and you said, I run a lot. I feel like I should be able to eat these without any guilt. And boom. And I was like, that's great. I love that.
Yeah.
If you could have any superpower, what superpower would you choose?
Oh man, I'd love to experience the world like a horse. I mean, I think of that a lot, and I would really love to just say, I want to have the eyes and the ears and the sense of smell and the sense of touch that a horse does, just to experience that, just to understand some of the things that after being around them all my life that still surprise me. I mean, I think, I don't know if that would be a superpower, but that would be something I would dearly love. Or to make a horse talk like a person just for a day and say, look, like if you're colicking, where does it hurt? Like that would be so incredibly helpful.
Mm-hmm. I
Yeah,
think
I love
most
that.
of us would make bad horses. We would be very difficult to get along with if we had the same traits as horses for the most part. Thoughts
Probably.
or feelings? Are you more
Both.
thoughtful?
Of
Both?
course, both.
Okay. So tell me about
Yeah.
that. How
I've
do
been
they go
accused of
together
thinking
for you?
too much. Well, yeah, it's like I shift back and forth. Like sometimes I get into my own head and think too much, and that's a bad thing. And then I've been accused mostly by my husband of being too emotional. So, you can probably relate to that. Or April can relate to that, not so much you. But yeah, I definitely want to cultivate both. And, I'm trying to like shift back and forth. And when I'm writing, it's, yeah, more feeling than thinking, definitely.
Are you decisive or indecisive?
Oh, that depends. Like I
Okay.
decided to move to New Mexico. That took me like 5 minutes or less. Like I just packed my backpack and said, I'm out of here. So yeah, that was decisive. Then there's like what to order in a restaurant. My God, that can take forever.
Okay. I see that. You're a lady of opposites, huh? Um, okay. Add some
Yeah,
interest.
the big decisions are easy. The little decisions I agonize over.
You need to just carry a coin in your pocket and just flip the coin and go with it. Huh? I wish my wife would do that sometime.
Yeah, but yeah, some of the biggest decisions in my life, I'm just like bingo, and that took no thought at all. And then the little tiny decisions, oh my God, yeah, that takes forever.
My wife and I fight over a lot of stuff, but like that, some of the big things we named our kids in less time than it takes her to pick a restaurant. That's one of those things that takes some couples months, and the baby will be 2 weeks old and they still don't have a name. We named ours in 5 minutes, so never
Good for
can
you.
tell. What kind of music do you like?
Oh man. Well, when I moved, I grew up in the 80s. So yeah, I got majorly into Bruce Springsteen. As a teenager, I got to see him in concert and yeah, that was awesome. Then I moved over here and then I got into country music. And so, none of my German friends understand that, but I got majorly into Chris Ledoux. I would say that's my biggest fandom.
Oh yeah,
So I've been listening to him since 1990 and I'll never get tired. Yeah.
that was a loss to the world right there. That man died
And I
way
like
too soon.
Americana, bluegrass. That was huge. Yeah, that was
Okay.
huge. We just drove through Casey, and every time we drive to Wyoming, I have to stop in Casey and stop at that bronze statue and just like sit there and contemplate for a while. How lucky we were to have him, and for how long, and how good it would be if he was still around. I mean, it gets me super emotional.
Well, I guess I'll let you answer this because we're going to get into it more in a minute. But do you have a hobby outside of horses?
I run a lot, a fair amount.
Just a little bit. Huh?
Yeah, yeah. Just I'm a recreational runner.
Okay. Sweet, salty, or spicy?
Sweet. And some and I'm in New Mexico, so spicy too. Like the green chili is, a beautiful thing, but yeah, sweet is like my downfall.
Okay.
I can eat a whole bag of Twizzlers in like 15 minutes.
What is your favorite dinosaur or deep sea creature?
Oh, my favorite deep sea creature is probably the octopus. They're fascinating.
I absolutely love octopus. I
I mean,
have a
I don't,
little
and
bit
I'm
of
not sure I'd want
obsession.
to meet one in the dark, but yeah, they're just amazing.
They really are. I
Yeah, I
won't
wonder if
get
there's a way
into
to train them. Like, imagine all those tentacles. Like, if you had to like control their tentacles, like how much more complicated that would be, like training a horse.
and multiple brains. I mean, like, what do you
Yeah,
do with that?
yeah. I mean,
We don't know what
yeah,
side
that
of the
would be
brain,
super challenging. So I'm
yeah,
glad.
much less which brain we're dealing with today.
Yeah.
Okay. Could a vampire detective enter a house if they had a warrant?
Not if the house has the garlic clove and not if there's like some sunlight involved.
Fair enough. Well, Katrin, I'm going to award you 1,017 points, which makes you our high
That is so
scorer
generous.
for this game of all time. If you want to get really
All right.
competitive, I think you beat Jack by like a couple hundred points there at least, so you can send her a nasty text when we're done here. Um, and that high of a score
Oh boy.
entitles you to either an awkward silence or a genuine compliment. Your choice.
Daniel, I love your mustache. It's the most groomed thing I've ever seen in my life. That's a compliment.
No, no, I compliment you.
Oh, you compliment me? All right. Well,
Yes.
okay. Well, didn't you say so? Okay, go ahead.
Okay. I'm going to cut that out. Yeah.
You don't want your mustache to get complimented?
I don't, yeah, I don't really think of it like, anyway. I don't take compliments very well, and I suspect you're the same way. So let me try to make it awkward for you now.
You're right about that.
Um, so one of the things that I think characteristic of you that I really appreciate is I think you are a genuine, independent, and critical thinker. I read some of the things that you write and the perspectives and the point of views that you come up with, and you're never parroting something else or something that you heard somewhere or this other person's opinion. You always have an original thought from a unique perspective, and it's very clear that what you're saying is your own. And I really respect that of you. I think very few people are actual original thinkers, and the world definitely needs more of them. So that's what I'm going to say
Wow.
is my compliment for you.
Wow,
Uh,
Daniel. Thank you. I'm totally blown away by this.
well, why don't you give us the 30,000 foot view of what it is that you do in the horse world?
What I do is, it may not seem like much, but what I do is I make relationships between horses and their people a little bit better. And so, mostly horses come to me for training, and it's like, so then I deal with the horse and I explain things to the horse, and then I work with the owner more, and then I put them together, and then I try to make that relationship better. And I always joke that it's like, yeah, it's like this horse has to spend a little more time on my couch, but generally things work out, and I feel really good about that.
Okay. Well, what percentage in your business are you working with horses like in training, and what percentage are you working with people and lessons and so forth? Do you do equal amounts or heavily one way or the other? Or?
I still ride all day, every day, just because that's what I love how to do. But I also work with people more these days because I really feel like I used to just send horses home after they were with me for like 90 days or whatever. And then they'd sometimes come back in exactly the same state as before I ever met them. And then I thought, now there's got to be a better way. So now I start working more with the horse, and then the owner comes, and I include owner lessons, as many as the owner wants, in my training. And so I'm trying to be really fair about that. And so, yeah, I do more teaching these days. I'm trying to teach better. I think that's like something that's in the horse world that's not as common as you'd think, that people can actually teach other people. So I'm really working on that. So yeah, I still do more writing than teaching, but I do more teaching than I used to.
So do you do mostly teaching there at your barn, or do you hit the road and do clinics and that sort of stuff as well, or what?
Yeah, I do some clinics. I go to Colorado. I go to out of state some, but yeah, I'm still like, people mostly bring horses to me, and then it's like there's days when I hardly leave the arena. Like horses just show up, and I work with them, and I work with their owners, and that's my day, and that's good. I like it that way.
Mm-hmm. Doesn't sound too bad. Why don't you tell us how you got started in horses and how you sort of progressed to where you are right now? I know you had a fairly unique and kind of wandering journey, so why don't you tell us all about that?
Well, I grew up in Germany and yeah, I was horse crazy as a kid. And so, I pestered my parents for riding lessons. And so, they said, okay, fine, you can have one lesson a week. I was, I think, 7 years old. And so, I got that and I got started in the whole German dressage thing at the local riding barn. That's in every village in Germany. And then, pretty soon that was no longer enough. So when I was like 9 or 10, I started taking my bicycle to the barn and started, mucking stalls and cooling out horses for people and, taking care of other people's horses. And then as a teenager, I was, hanging out at the barn a lot, taking my bicycle there every day after school. And I'd get on any horse nobody else wanted to ride. So I was already, training horses, if you, want to look at it that way, though I didn't really know what I was doing, but people gave me more and more horses to ride. And then I was so, I found dressage so incredibly boring, as a teenager, like you do. And then I remember going to this expo in Munich when I was 12, and there I saw quarter horses doing reining and cow horse type things. And I was just so blown away. And right then I knew like that is what I really, really, really want to do. I mean, that is like, I had read all the books about dressage. I had read Müseler and Steinbrecht and those German people. Like those are very dense texts. And, I had plowed through them as a kid. And I was like, well, yeah, I kind of understand that there's lightness and harmony and there's like all those things that we want. But in my dressage lessons, I didn't really feel that. It was just a lot of like more leg and more rein and more pushing and more pulling. And I was like, God, that it's not supposed to be that way. I know it. I know it. And then I saw those quarter horses and something just clicked. I was like, okay, that's what it's supposed to look like. So then I patiently waited until I graduated from high school. And then I left Germany the next day and took a train to Italy and worked in a Western barn there, where Western riding was a little bit more common there. And so then I saved up money for a ticket to New Mexico, and I didn't have, anything. I had a couple of contacts, a couple of people who said, "Oh, if you're ever in New Mexico, look me up." And I didn't know Americans just say that; it's just a turn of phrase, right? But I took it seriously. I thought, "Oh, well, isn't that nice?" And so yeah, I had like $200 and a backpack with clothes, and I had a one-way plane ticket, which in those days you could do. That was in 1990, and so I showed up at the 62 Bar Cattle Company in Tomé, New Mexico, in 1990, and they hired me. And then I had assistant trainer and working student jobs for different Western trainers. And then I also quickly figured out that the show horse world and the Western world, there's nothing, there's no lightness there, there's no harmony there. Or it's like, I don't want to generalize, but, the trainers I worked for, there was a lot of, stuff that, you really, I don't even want to talk about. I mean, I'm ashamed to admit I did some of it, like all the jerking and the pulling and the rock grinder spurs and the ace promazine and whatnot. So I got away from that. And then I worked for a couple of better trainers. And so I spent like 5 years apprenticing with different professionals and took, something good and something bad from everyone. And then I went out on my own. And then I came back to dressage because I was like, okay, this is something every horse can do. This is something that's actually good for every horse. With my improved understanding from having worked for all those Western trainers, one of my big influences when I was really young was Mike Kevel, who was going to Italy a lot when I was there. And I met him a few times and worked with him a little bit. And I translated one of his Western horseman videos into German. So but yeah, Mike's a great guy. So he was one of my good mentors. But yeah, so that's my roundabout journey. And I still, ride in Western saddles a lot. I still ride in dressage saddles, about half the time. And I just think it's all the same soup, basically. If it's done well, it's good.
And Mike was actually about 3 or 4 guests back on the podcast. So
yeah, that's I saw that. I need to listen to that one.
He's a guy I've had a lot of respect for a long time. I really have.
Yeah, he's one of the good ones.
For sure. Yes, ma'am. So I really agree with you on that. And that dressage really isn't this its own special thing. It is supposed to just be training to help to develop a horse, and in theory should help any sort of horse and any sort of discipline do anything with more strength and balance and flexibility and all of that stuff. So it almost is surprising to me that you do kind of have some of the hoity-toity people on a pedestal that are condescending to others, because it's really like a broad umbrella of training. It wasn't really, in my opinion, ever meant to be its own special specific thing. It just was supposed to be all encompassing, and we've gotten here however we got here with it. So
I so agree with you on that. I mean, it's like, I've met so many people. They look at me come with my little quarter horses or rescue ponies or whatever in my Western saddle, and they're like, "Oh, well, that's not dressage." And I'm like, I beg to differ. Of course that's dressage. look at how well that horse is going, and look at how much better that horse is moving, and look at how much happier that horse looks. But yeah, so I think today dressage really means two different things. One, the competitive discipline with the the rhinestones on the brow bands and the tall boots and all of that, and that can be well done or not, just like any competitive discipline. I have a lot of respect for people who do it well, because I believe me, it's not easy. I've done it, and it's really, really hard. But then to me, mostly dressage is something much, much broader, and it's a way of helping every horse becoming a better athlete and a happier riding partner. And I figure if we choose to get on their backs, that's the least we can do for them, is to build the correct muscles so they can carry us with greater ease, and to build their minds to where they understand what we want, and how, and teach them the language, and learn their language, and kind of meet there in the middle. I mean, that's really what dressage is.
Well, my next question will seem a little contradictory, but this is just how I wrote it. So you ride both English and Western, and they do have some differences, but they also intertwine, as we were just saying. So how would you say your background working for the Western trainers and all has influenced you as a dressage rider?
Well, I think there's been some positive influences going both ways. To me, the biggest difference between the two traditions is really that, the way people understand dressage. A lot of the hoity-toity dressage people are like, well, dressage is like a form of art. It's like done for its own sake. And so the horse and the rider focus exclusively on each other, like in the Spanish riding school. There's no greater purpose. It's just like you ride just to ride, and to make it as beautiful as possible, and to elevate it to an art form. But and then the Western tradition, that's one of the many things I love about it. It's a working tradition. So you generally, as a rider, it's like you have something other than the horse to focus on. So you have a fence to check, or you have a cow to track, or or whatever. And so then you have a job, the horse has a job. So you got to be able to depend on your horse as the working partner. So to me, the takeaway from that for dressage is, and there's a lot more overlap, of course, than what people think, because dressage also came from the cavalry traditions. And if you're riding into battle, and of course you have something else to focus on than your horse, and so you have to be able to depend on your horse too, I would think. But to me, the big thing that dressage riders can learn from the good Western riders is this concept of until further notice. Like, you do your job, horse, I do my job, and until further notice, I can depend that you maintain that. I'm not always going to nag you and prod you and squeeze you and do all these things. And so it's like a spectrum of communication. Like, on one hand, you have like the Western horse that just does its thing, and you can depend on that. On the other hand, you have dressage, which is like a much more involved kind of communication. And I think you, as a good rider, you got to be able to do both, and horses got to know both.
How often do you ride in one hand? Do you do mostly all in two hands, or are you sometimes in one hand? Because to me, that's one of the big differences, is in these horses that have something to do, often you need one hand for.
Yeah, you need the other hand.
If you're in the cavalry, you might want to have a shield or a sword, or something along those lines. Otherwise, you're just riding all around one another. And so do you do very much of that, and do you feel like that influences things? I guess
definitely, yeah. And so to me, that's the spectrum. Yeah, I do most of my riding two-handed, just because I don't really have anything else to focus on. I have the luxury of just being with my horses, and it's like, I'm like, okay, we're here together, let's figure this out. But then it's like with a green horse, and this, like, your hands are pretty far apart, and then as the horse progresses, your hands get quieter and become closer together. And then the goal in dressage, as in Western, is to be able to do it one-handed. And so, yeah, there are times when I take my reins in one hand, like even in a snaffle, I'm like, all right, can I do this with one hand? Yeah. And I do ride, of some of my Western dressage horses. Yeah, they graduate to a curb, and I do take the reins in one hand, and I'm like, all right, how quiet are my hands really? Am I cheating? Like, if I have to use my hands independent from each other, so that's cheating. So yeah, I do that a lot to check. To me, like, the one-handed riding, like in dressage, that's a check. How well trained is my horse? And you should be in an ideal world, on a really well-trained horse, you should be able to do all the stuff you do with two hands, you should be able to do with one hand.
Yes, ma'am. I'm curious. To me, you seem like the sort of person that would really enjoy getting into the Goroka. Have you ever played with that at all?
I haven't, but that's on my list of things I want to do. And there's a Gaurocha clinician, there's a working equitation clinician that I've run into, that I'm going to try to come to get to my barn and give a clinic. And I've handled a Gaurocha, but it's like I'm pretty inept at it. So I need to get better. I'm playing with the working equitation stuff, and that's really fun.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, that's one of the things that I'm like, okay, that's like it's like roping. I mean, I'm a horrible roper, so yeah, and that I've kind of given up on. But the garrocha I want to do.
I wish there was more working equitation in our area. That looks like it would be a lot of fun.
Oh, that looks
I
like a
I could
blast.
certainly get into that. Yes, ma'am. Why don't we shift a little bit and get into the ultra marathon? So you've got this horse world, and I know how obsessive you kind of have to be to make it through all of the apprenticing. It's not a 9 to 5, 5 days a week kind of a gig. You're pretty much going to work your butt off all the time, and it's very, 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 very stressful. And so, how did you get into running and all of that stuff?
Well, that was, yeah, it's like you're right. I still work 6 days a week. I mean, that's been the big struggle with running, those long distances. And that, I should say an ultra marathon is like any distance longer than a marathon. So I've completed, I think, 2,200-mile races now. And I'm 53, so I hope I have a couple more in me. And eventually I'll cut down to shorter distances like 50 milers or marathons. But it's hard to find the time. Now, I got into it when I had a midlife crisis about 10, 11 years ago. Yeah, I was in my early 40s and I was working in this very competitive dressage barn in this very competitive dressage setting. And I thought, oh, I finally arrived. I finally had a couple of nice warm bloods in training. And I thought I wanted to, go up the levels and be your standard dressage trainer. And, and I saved up money for every clinic I could go to. And I clinicked with some really famous people. And some of them made me feel, like dirt. And, others were very helpful, but mostly it was just like I never felt good enough, and I never felt like I was getting anywhere. And I was just thinking, my God, if I'm not doing the horses any good, then why am I still doing it? So I quit horses, and then I went back to grad school, and then I started running longer and longer because I just had all this surplus energy. Because for the first time in my entire life, I wasn't riding horses all day every day, and I was like, what do I do now? And of course, the quitting horses part didn't last that long. You might have guessed that I was miserable. I really, really missed them. And even my husband said, my God, find a horse to ride somewhere. It's like, I can't stand this. And so, and then I came back to horses with a greater understanding of, that I didn't want to be your standard dressage trainer. And that wasn't really my ambition at all. And I would never fit in, and that was okay. But the running I kept. And so I finished my first 100-mile marathon when I was 42 in Leadville. And, I'm hoping to finish my 9th Leadville 100 here in a couple of weeks. But yeah, I just kept that up because it's like a beautiful thing to balance out the horses. Like now my life is so people busy. There's so many people that come and watch their horses go and then want lessons, and there's always somebody there. It used to be just me and the horses at the barn, and now more and more there's humans there. And it's not that I don't like that, but I'm an introvert, and so I need to head out for a nice solo run at the end of the day just to get my get my equilibrium back. um so that the other thing about the ultra marathons that relates to horses really well is that it's competitive, it's a sport. But I really learned running those races that it's a much healthier kind of competition than the dressage or the horse shows. And yeah, I don't know how much showing you've done or whether you've enjoyed it, but it's like there's been times where I'm despairing because there's so much it's just not a very pleasant environment. There's all those people that are talking about each other, and there's people who I mean, it's just not a super pleasant kind of competition. Like if you do well, then people hold it against you, and if you don't, then they laugh about you, and then it was just not very nice. And so then I got into the ultras, and I really learned, like, my God, now there's a sport. Like it's a competition, but it's not so much about winning. So in ultra marathons, what we do is like we honor the last person that crosses the finish line as much or more than the first person. And so there's always been that tradition, like in Leadville at the golden hour, the last hour where people can finish, everybody comes out, and those people get all the cheers in the world. And it's like, wow, you just squeezed in just under the cutoff. How cool is that? Now, if horse shows could be a little more like that. It's like I remember when I did my first ultra marathon, my first 50 miler, it was an out and back horse, and there was this really famous at the time guy, Anton Kropitska, flying down the mountain and on his way to win the race, and I was still slogging up and barely halfway there, and he took the time to look at me and say, "Wow, good job, keep it up." And I was so astonished that like the winner of the race would do that. that somebody like Anton would acknowledge me, who had never run a 50-mile race before. And I think horse shows can learn from that. And, horse competition needs to be a little bit more like that, or a lot more like that.
I would definitely agree. I can honestly tell you, I do not go to a horse show when I go to have fun. It is definitely a working day for me. I've done a few ranch horse things that are a lot more relaxed and I could kind of enjoy myself. But for the most part, it's not something I have a lot of fun doing, exactly because of some of that stuff. You have when you've been in the business, I guess you probably see it a little differently. There are some cutthroat stuff, and you've always got the people that are cheating and trying to get away with something. And yeah, there's a lot of it that I don't care for in that regard. So I figured I'd be a clinician, and it turns out the clinician world has some of that in it too. But anyway, it is what it is, right? So this will relate to a bigger topic, which we may or may not get into right now, but how do you feel that your upcoming through the levels in this business and all has been different for you? So you are a woman, you are also an immigrant, and so you're a smaller percentage of this than what most would be. So do you feel like that has been a strength for you, or a handicap, or you've had the same sort of struggles, just different struggles? Or how would you characterize your journey with those particular?
Well, that's a super interesting question, Daniel. So first of all, I've always worked, like, not always, but I've worked mostly for other women in the business. And I have to say that, a couple of them were more cutthroat and, more jaded than the men I've worked for and with. And I think, in the 1990s, they felt they had to be like that, which is too bad. And I think that is slowly normalizing. Like right now, I think, okay, so, I'm in good company. There's still, there are times when I'm like, okay, if I only had, the mustache and the chinks and the confidence that comes with that, I could charge more money. But, I think that's probably just me. The immigrant thing, that is an interesting one because, that is, I was actually, I was an overstay. So it's like I just stayed on my tourist visa and then my tourist visa ran out. So I was here illegally for a number of years. And that was a really interesting experience. First of all, I think the horse industry would utterly collapse without illegal immigrants. That's just how it is. Second of all, I think this notion that people have that illegal immigrants take advantage of, hardworking Americans, I think that's not really true, because when I was an illegal immigrant, like people took advantage of me. Like I was working at a barn where they found out I didn't have papers, and they're like, "Oh, good, we can get away with paying you nothing, and we'll make you work 7 days a week, and we'll, it's like we'll give you this, like broken down couch to sleep on, and you can't say anything because otherwise we'll turn you in." So there was that. That made life a little more difficult. My German accent, once I got back into dressage, that made life easier because people assume dressage when you're from Germany. So yeah, I think it's like a give and take on a lot of levels. And, it's like, yeah. So there was that.
I will say, from my perspective, when I was apprenticing, I knew quite a few other apprentices and peers that were not from the United States. So Australians, Canadians, some people from Europe, and then, of course, Mexicans and so forth. I will say that if you are ever on the receiving end of what Katrin described as her coming over here, and someone wants to be in the horse business and they're not from the United States, there is a 95% chance you're about to hire one of the hardest working people you could ever hope to have at your barn. So I can't think of a foreigner in the horse business that I came across that I didn't really like and that didn't absolutely deserve to be there and worked their butt off and so forth. All of the problematic people I can recall were Americans. No question about it. So I'll definitely give a plug there. So I guess I'll ask this now, because I've gotten into some of the other classical dressage people that I've had on. I've always asked them which school they're from and how would they characterize it. And you obviously have the background of the German school, but have you reached outside that box and read some of the French and the Spanish masters and so forth and incorporated all of that. Like I've seen you ride. You are a very technical rider. I mean, I could tell that 3 seconds in the way you were in rhythm with the horse and riding and all. You did not have the veins popping out of your forearms, constipated look that I would characterize German dressage riders as typically having. So I would not peg you as like if you didn't speak with your accent and I watched you ride a horse, I wouldn't immediately go, oh, that's a German schooler right there, you know. So what is your self-education background with regard to the schools, or have you just thrown all that out the window and you just do Katrin and whatever Katrin wants to do? How do you go about that?
No, yeah, first of all, like I believe in dressage. I think it's a good way of riding. And there's like all those little, yeah, like internal, arguments that people have with the French school and the Portuguese school and the German school. Like that's only like, it's like, yeah, that's a really interesting thing to follow. And if you look at if you study those old books that most of which I've read, and yeah, it's like I've read a lot like Nuno Oliveira, and I've read this Miguel Tavora, who I think he moved to Australia, but I really love his book. And and then of course I've studied all those old Germans just because that's where I'm from and I can read the original, and sometimes the translations are not very good. So that said, first of all, if you read those German originals, there's a lot of compassion for the horse, in them, and it's not meant to be constipated looking with the veins popping, and the biceps bulging. It's that's like a current interpretation of it that I think is wrong. It's not supposed to be like that. But yes, I agree it is. And then also, where the other things that I've read and gotten my education from are, the Dorrance brothers and all like everything I could find that's written about the Western tradition of writing, and that was very, very helpful. And I'm always looking for the common ground. I'm always looking for the overlap. And yeah, I've read some of Philippe Carl's stuff, and I agree with it to a point. And then I've read a lot of it's like I just like to read things about horsemanship and figure out, well, what does apply to all of us. It's really it's like that's like where things get interesting for me. I'm looking the common ground, and it's a lot more extensive than I think a lot of people realize. The technical part, I think if you're a good rider or trainer, you've got 3 areas that you got to be good at. So you got to have a good seat, first of all. Then you got to have feel, which is like the neglected stepchild, because nobody, I wrote a book about it, but it's it's really difficult to even define what it is. And then the third one is technique, education, knowledge, a coherent system of talking to the horse, a coherent language of the aids, and that you have to get through some formal education, I think. I mean, I know people that have all the feel in the world. I work with a guy like that, but he has no formal education at all, and his seat is really crooked. And so all the feel in the world doesn't really help him establish a great relationship with the horse to teach the horse much useful stuff. And so that is too bad. Now, if you only have a good seat, but you don't know how to really use it and how to really use it to influence the horse and talk to the horse, well, then that's kind of a waste, because, it's like what are you going to do? It's so, and then if and there's a lot of systems of aids that as you probably know, they don't really lead anywhere. So I think it helps to study some of those classical things and concepts and go from there. Like I've retrained horses that were trained in that Western pleasure tradition, and they were trained to do the spur stop, and I think that's just absolutely abhorrent, because there's no forward. And the harder you use your leg and the harder you dig around with your spur, the slower they go. I'm like, okay, so there's a better way to do this. So that's like an aberration to me. So yeah, I think technique is important, but never at the expense of feeling the horse. And that is something that you learn, and that is something that I always work on, and that I'm trying to get more creative with my students with, because it's like they're like, okay, if I give an aid, if I put my leg here, if I put my right earlobe there, the horse should be doing that. And it's like, well, yeah, you can do all that, but most of the time the horse will say, no, I'm not. And then where do you go? You've got to have a plan B. You've got to have like an ongoing conversation with that horse, and have that be constructive. And part of that is to feel and understand the horse. So yeah, technique in and of itself isn't going to get you anywhere, but technique, if you don't have it, that's also not very good. Like you got to have, it's like, so feel is the listening part where you say, okay, now I hear the horse, but then technique is knowing how to respond and how to answer and how to like engage your side of the conversation.
I love
and
the way
neither
you
one nor the other.
Yes, I love the way you're organizing that, and I absolutely agree with you. There have definitely been like some rodeo guys that I knew that got into breaking horses, and generally speaking, they had a pretty good seat, but they did not have good feel or technique at all, and it wound up being a train wreck. So you really do sort of have to balance that whole
Yeah.
part of things. And I also definitely agree with you. I haven't read all of the old dressage books. I've read some of them, and I probably need to read a good bit more. I've been studying other things in the last 5 or 8 years besides reading horse books, really. But I too sort of read those books, and then you look out the window at what's going on in that world, and you look back at the book, and you look back out the window, and you're kind of like, how did you all read this and came up with that? Like there seems to
Yeah.
be a pretty big disconnect between what this means
It's
to
a
me
huge
and what
disconnect.
I see you doing out there, and just like, yeah. So, but I kind of agree with you. I think that's more of a modern thing. I don't think it is the tradition. It is a perversion of the tradition that has gotten into. Hopefully, the pendulum will shift and it'll get back into some more reasonable stuff. I can remember someone had shared with me a video from an Olympian. If I named her, everybody would know exactly who she was. And she was on her rest day with her horse going out for a little light hack and had the horse both reins pulled up behind the vertical for the whole of the hack out there as they're and I'm just like, what are you doing? Like what part of that is actually recuperative for the horse?
Oh,
I mean,
well, see, that's the thing. Yeah, that's the thing. Like in dressage, like I have this one mare in training that, it's kind of a retraining project, and she had the wrong kind of dressage training. And, that was like the biggest red flag I got on her. And, you couldn't walk that horse off on a loose rein. I'm like, okay, so we got to start there. If that horse is not relaxed enough to walk off on a loose rein, or like then trot and canter on a loose rein for that matter, like there's no need to worry about contact connection or heaven forbid collection. It's like, more important things to worry about, like just basic steering, basic relaxation, just like the basics. Like don't crank the neck round if there's much more important things than that. Yeah, I totally agree with you there.
so let's say that you were to get a horse in for training and it was that sort of horse that's sort of been pushed in or forced into the mold, and you sort of wind up with that glazed look in the eye where nobody's home anymore.
Yeah.
How do you go about building a connection with that horse where you can get them to come out of the shell? And it might take you a month or two, but eventually you actually get to meet the real horse that was hiding inside there and make progress. What series of steps do you envision going through with that sort of animal?
Well, with that sort of animal, and I do get that a lot, it's like, when their brains are a little bit fried and they get tense and anxious. So the first thing I do is I usually put a Western saddle on because it tends to be more comfortable for their back. And then, I tend to, it's like once it's safe to get on the horse and just, say, here, knock yourself out. I throw the contact away. I'm like, here, you don't have to do that. And I just go back to the very basics, just like the basic, the training skill, the rock bottom of it is relaxation. If that's not there, well, then you got to go and find it. And so sometimes that's all we do until we find it. And until that is there, that's like, otherwise your whole further training will be like a house of cards. It's like, boom, it just collapses. I mean, it's not going to be worth anything. If there is no relaxation, then that is, you got to go get some. And if that means, like doing some groundwork or putting the horse back in the round pen, starting the horse over, it's like, yeah, I usually go back to the Western saddle. I usually go back to the totally loose rein. I'm like, here, knock yourself out. There's nothing to brace and lean against. We're not going to do that. And it takes them a while, but that is generally where we start. And then from there, we can revisit the other ideas and make those a little more palatable for the horse. But yeah, it's a lot of times it says you go back to the relaxation, you just go on some very slow rides and trail rides and whatever. It's like you do some obstacles. It's like you teach the horse to go over the bridge and open the gate and just stand there while you do that. And then the horse goes, oh, not every time a person is on my back means I have to be on and tense and doing fancy things with my legs and my nose.
One of the worst experiences that I have had as a clinic in terms of a participant challenging me was a rider who was working, I believe, on third level dressage. They were out of the training level and they came to a clinic, and I wound up getting on the horse because it was just nervous, and it was going pretty badly. And so I
Yeah.
started just picking up one rein and bending him around and trying to loosen his back up and get him to relax and some of these things. And this lady had a fit. She was like, no, no, if you're going to ride my horse, you need to have, both reins in, and you need to be holding him in and all this stuff. And it was one of those times that it really struck me that there was no concept that it was okay to back up. If we had missed one of those more foundational steps,
Yes.
that we need to back up and take care of that. And the way this lady was viewing it, it was all progress. There was never
No.
we go back to first level and work on some of those things or anything. It was, no, this is a third level horse, and so it must be doing this, this, and this all of the time. And I was just thinking, this horse, the horse was getting dangerous. That was why I had gotten on him. I could
Yeah,
foresee,
no, it would. I mean, that sounds terrible.
yeah, this was going to be a blow up here before long. But there was just utter resistance from her on backing up or doing anything outside of what she considered a third level horse should be doing. And to me, that's, if you're riding a green horse at all, you had better be really good friends with the concept of backing up to more fundamental steps over and over and over and over
Oh
again
yeah,
until all of that
over
gets.
and that's like even with a really well trained horse. Yeah, I've got a horse now that's schooling the tempi changes in the working periods, and he's amazing. He's a little quarter horse. He's the best guy ever. But he gets tense. He's got some baggage. He's had some bad Western training years ago. So whenever he does, like, all right, we'll take a step back. We're gonna do whatever. I make sure that we do other things, that we don't just drill the movements of whatever level we're schooling. It's like the older I get, the more I'm like, no, you got to play with something and then get something. It's like, even if you don't get what you were asking for, I was like, all right, well, let's revisit that again in a while. Let's revisit that again tomorrow, and you make much more progress that way. But yeah, that is in dressage. There is that mindset of more is always better. And it's like if we practice it 50,000 times, then it's going to get better. And horses have different ideas. I mean, they're not tennis balls. They're not. It's not going to work very well if you do that. And then also that notion of contact that you're describing. It's like, oh no, you always got to have both reins tight. No, you don't. You just do not. I mean, one of the checks for, is my contact correct? And I do that a lot. Can I give it up? Can I go on a trail ride on a loose rein? Can I, just let the horse stretch forward and down when I lighten my seat and let the reins get longer? Can I just extend my hands forward and the horse, if I don't change it, anything else, will the horse just keep doing what he's doing until further notice? Like, it's not about, like, if you give the contact up and the horse starts running off or falling on his face, that wasn't very good connection. That wasn't correct. So then you got to go back to the drawing board.
So I want to take us
But yeah, I
back.
know exactly what you're describing, and it drives me crazy.
I'm going to take us back in our conversation a little bit when we were talking about sort of the different schools and all, and the texts and how they describe writing. To me, really the only thing that describes the way that I'm going to ride a horse is what the horse is giving me in terms of feedback. So I don't necessarily
Yeah.
have an agenda, or if I have an agenda, like you might watch me ride one horse and I look pretty firm on him. I'm kind of kicking his butt all around. And then the next horse I get on, it seems like I'm letting him get away with a whole lot of stuff. And you're kind of going like, what is this guy bipolar? What like there was no consistency there in the way he handled those two horses. But this horse needed me to handle him this way because of what he was telling me, and the other horse needed me to handle him this way. So one of the theories that I have is that the different schools of dressage were more formed by the types of horses that they had in those times than on maybe the opinions of the masters. I believe they were
Oh,
masters for the most
absolutely.
part, and they were just writing and responding according to what the group of horses they were dealing with needed them to be. And it wasn't a time period where borders were crossed and bloodlines were crossed. You kind of were going to spend your whole, if you were in the French school, you were going to ride thoroughbreds pretty much, or some fairly, finer bone, more refined type horses. And in the German school, you were going to be on these big, powerful tanks with cannon bones the size of your arm. And, and it was just a very different mindset that was required, but it was required because the horses were different, not because the people were so different. I guess.
Yeah.
Does that make sense
I
to you?
think you're absolutely right about that. Yeah, that makes total sense. I've thought about it along the same lines. It's very similar actually, because yeah, it's like you read the French school, it's like, yeah, so on the type of horse that, is a little bit lighter and is a little bit less substantial and has less of a tendency to lean and brace, but more of a tendency to be anxious. Like, yeah, that makes more sense. Then the German school, yeah, that's for those horses that have maybe more of the draft in them, like those older type warm bloods. It's like, yeah, so there, it's like what the Germans prescribe is like you drive the horse into contact and then they kind of give to themselves. That makes sense for them. So with a horse like that, yeah, I would probably do that. But I like the way you're describing that. And when I'm riding, that's what I'm always, doing too. And people tell me it's like, oh, you rode that horse differently from that horse. How come? It's like, well, it's like the first, I get on the horse, or I'm with the horse, I observe the horse, like, okay, so what does this horse need from me today? How can we make this ride a tiny bit, how can we finish a tiny bit better, a tiny bit more balanced, a tiny bit with a tiny bit more understanding than before the ride? And that's really the only goal. And it's like, all right, how do we get there? And that really varies. And to me, the training scale, and that everybody always talks about, that's more like this this scaffolding that keeps you honest. And it's like more like this thing is like you go up, you go down. It's like, okay, so it's like you try to you play with something more advanced. You're like, okay, so then we're losing the straightness, so then we get that back. And it's not like this set in stone where you're like boom boom boom, I climb it. No, it's like you always go a little up, a little down. You always revisit, like, are the basics still there? And then, like, if they're there, then maybe you go a little bit up again, but then you always have to revisit the bottom layers. But yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense, and I really like the way you described that.
So if you could,
that's what I do all day.
Yes, ma'am. If you could custom build a horse, kind of like a Build-A-Bear workshop or something, what kind of horse are you looking for? Do you like them a little hotter or a little more stoic? What is your particular preference?
My favorite horses, they're usually pretty complicated just because that's what I get a lot. I like my horse to be sensitive. I really like a horse that's engaged with me, that I say, so that's why I really like the mindset of the quarter horse. Like, I don't want to generalize, but some of the best horses I've ridden were quarter horses and are quarter horses. Or some Iberians that too very have the mindset is like, okay, what else can we do? I can do that better. Like, most of the warm bloods I've worked with, honestly, it's they don't really do that. They're like, okay, well, we've been out here 45 minutes, I think it's time to be done. And the quarter horses, they're like, all right, we can do that even better. And so then you have to be the one who stops them and says, okay, now it was good, now we're going to do something else. But yeah, that is the kind of horse that I would design, like a nice, well balanced, about maybe 15 hand, like nothing huge, a horse that's like light off the light in the front end and powerful in the hind end, and a horse that's just a joy to work with.
All right. Well, I think, Katrin,
yeah, I'm a big advocate for quarter horses in dressage. I think a lot of the adult amateurs. I think I lost you.
Yes, ma'am. Okay, there
Can
you
hear
go.
me?
I can hear you now. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Okay. Yeah, now I can hear you again.
Okay. So we lost you
Yeah,
around the time you were saying you were a big advocate for quarter horses in dressage.
Yeah, in dressage, and yeah, it's like, by the way, now I'm showing more Western dressage than classical. I think that's like a more inclusive, more welcoming sport for a wider variety of people and horses, and I appreciate that. But it's like, to me, a quarter horse is like a really, really versatile, really usable dressage horse, and they get they get kind of laughed about by dressage enthusiasts. And I've shown up to big clinics with a quarter horse, and I'm like, don't laugh about this horse. He can after your horse is quit for the day, he'll still be out there trying really hard for me. So yeah, I think a lot of the amateurs I work with, they would be better off on a quarter horse than on the very expensive imported horse that they think they need to have.
I'm going to tell you a little funny story. My personal horse is a quarter horse gelding named Curly, and he's all cow-bred bloodlines and everything. So he's not very big. He's not a real heavy. He's not as stout as most of the cow-bred quarter horses. I always describe him as a very feminine gelding, very fine boned, and all of that. And I was at an expo.
I know what you.
I was at an expo, and it was me doing a demonstration and then a dressage lady doing a demonstration, and I'm back there brushing my horse off, and she comes up to me and says, "This is a nice yearling that you've brought here. What is he?" And I said, "Yearling? He's like 14 or something like that, you know." And so, and she wasn't joking. She really thought I had, brought a pony or something. So anyway, then I went and did a bridleless bareback demonstration on him. So there, stick that where your yearling goes. I think it is about time for
Absolutely.
our sponsor for this episode, Katrin. And this is a sponsor that was with us a while back. And when they heard that I had a lovely lady such as yourself on, they wanted to come back and sponsor an episode again. So this episode is sponsored by Long Piers Eatery. Ladies, you've endured a lunch or two with your husband or boyfriend at Hooters or Twin Peaks. Now it's your turn. At Long Piers, you'll be served by a shirtless Viking. Our Vikings are always at least 6'2" and must keep a strict skin and cuticle care regime. They come in your choice of tall, dark, and hairy chested or tall, blonde, and waxed. Enjoy a glass of wine with our complimentary heated blankets and soft slippers. Be visually entertained by our playful cats who have the run of the restaurant, our decorating staff who switch out decor hourly, or simply watch your significant other as he does his best to not make eye contact with your half-naked eye candy. Men get white wine half off on Wednesday and red wine half off on Friday, with an approving nod from you to your Viking that he listened to all of the details of your week without offering helpful and pragmatic solutions to your problems. He gets a free dessert if he managed to follow the ever-changing people throughout your stories that the pronoun she revolvingly referred to. Every salad comes with complimentary French fries that he cannot touch and a to-go cup that we fully intend you to drink 10% of and then leave in your
Oh, that's
husband's
so
cup
cool.
holder. Long Piers Eatery, made for women and where you can order a man to make you a sandwich. You can always find us between Hobby Lobby and a way overpriced coffee shop that has no understanding of how to represent cup sizes. So that's our sponsor. I hope you like them.
Daniel, I just wish that was a real thing and I would go to it. I'm like, yeah, it's like I need a Viking serving me wine.
I think a few of these
I think that's great.
Yeah, these things need to be real business ventures.
Right. It's like, no, I think you're onto something there. I was like, yeah, I think we need to do that. There's a shortage of 6'2" Vikings, though. I mean, that might be a problem.
There probably is. Yeah, you might have to be in a college town or something like that. But
yeah. We'll have to put out like a casting call. I mean, it's doable, but yeah, it's like I think you're onto something there. If you ever quit horses, that would be a great venture.
Well, we were talking just a little bit about the types of horses that you're riding and all, and I just wanted to ask. I know this is going to be a very generic question, but what would you say is sort of the average or the most common horse that you're dealing with in your business, and what are you typically trying to do to improve them? For instance, I think most people, when they hear dressage, they're thinking of, the higher level pre-St. George horses and airs above the ground and that sort of stuff. But there's way, way more training level horses out there than anything else. So what level of horse and all are you typically dealing with and trying to advance them to in your business?
Well, so my horses come from all sorts of different backgrounds, and people usually find me because either they've come off their horse, or they're having like relationship problems with their horse. They feel like they don't understand their horse, they don't know where to go, or they're disillusioned with the regular dressage and they don't know what's wrong, but they know something is. So yeah, I get horses that are like former race horses, former show horses, that trail horses, horses that have developed bad habits, some rescue horses. And so then my first job is always to see, okay, where can I meet this horse horse, and what does this horse need from me? And so then, it's like, so then I just, build the basics from there. And then if we go into some real dressage work, that's great. Like I said, I've got a couple of horses now that are schooling like a lovely lateral stuff and flying changes and whatnot. But before that, I mean, most of my horses are nowhere near that. And they just, I just have to see, okay, how can I, help you understand that I mean no harm? How can I get you, to lose the anxiety? How can I get you to uncurl your neck? How can I get you to understand that my leg comes and you go? That sort of thing. So it's pretty basic stuff.
Okay.
But yeah, it's like what keeps life interesting is that they get horses from so many different worlds and they've learned all those different things. And so then that's another part of figuring out like, okay, where does this horse where is this horse coming from? And so it helps that I know, what a roping horse goes like, and I know what a Western pleasure horse goes like and what they've learned and where they come from. And I can help them understand that there's something a little bit different and more consistent out there.
Do you remember some of those first times where you came across some of those odd queuing systems and all, like the spur stop on the Western pleasure horse, and you're riding along and you're just kind of like, what in the hell is going on here? This is not how this horse is supposed to ride. And then you have to figure out that there's actually a queue in place here and all of that. Or have you come across many of these horses that are queued that take a lead with the inside leg instead of the outside leg? Those sorts of things.
Yeah, I've come across plenty of horses that only have one lead, and I've come across the spur stop kind of horses. And then I've come across horses that have only done walk and trot and a big fast trot and like out on the trail, and then they've never cantered with the rider on. And so now they're like in their teens, and the owner says, well, I would like for my horse to learn how to canter. So, then we go out into a big field and maybe do that over time. But yeah, there's all sorts of issues. It's like, that's what keeps life super interesting. It's like, I'm never bored. There's always something new to discover. Then you get horses that have been ridden in tie downs and standing martingales, and then you take it all off, and then you have this horse that's all over the place, and then and the owner's getting really worried, and it's like, no, it'll be better, just trust me on this. So yeah, it's a lot of that. But yeah, it's like over the years, I always think, well, there's nothing I haven't seen, but then there's always something I haven't seen.
Yes, ma'am.
Like I worked with a gaited horse recently that I had been taught to like the harder you pull, the faster the horse goes, and that was interesting.
Mm-hmm.
That was really interesting.
Yeah, that can be its own world for sure. I have definitely seen some odd things in the gaited horses. That it does have, like everything else, the cream of the crop trainers are good horsemen that understand and would be appreciated by anybody else. But yeah, there's a level in there of stuff that makes me scratch my head for sure with that group. So what would you say is the average horse person that you're dealing with? Are there more mid to lower level, intermediate and beginner riders, or do you have very many riders that are been doing this at a pretty high level for a while, or are you having more problem riders that may have traumatic experiences they're trying to work through and all? Who sort of is your customer, I guess?
My customer is I would that's easier than the average horse, because my horses, there's so much variety there. My average customer is somebody who's looking for something that's maybe not standard dressage but dressage based, that's looking for a better relationship with the horse, and may somebody who is not necessarily super competitive and looking to show, but somebody who wants to ride better and to understand their horse better. And that I can work with. Like if somebody says, oh, I want my horse to just go up the levels and without any consideration for the horse and whether the horse really wants to do it, I'm like, yeah, I'm probably not your trainer. There's other people who specialize in that, but that's not me. And so, yeah, most of the people that I deal with, they're not maybe necessarily, serious show riders, but they're very serious about wanting to become better horse people. And that's the common denominator. They're very serious about that. And so that's what I help them become.
I can certainly appreciate that. I don't have that many people that are competing in my customer base either. What I think a lot of people wouldn't understand is that the people that compete and show are just a tiny slice of the horse world. I think it's somewhere between 55 to 60% of horse owners are trail riders. They're the largest group by far out there in the horse world, and the people that are showing competitively or racing or whatever, they make up only about a quarter of the actual horse group out there. So there are way more people to serve that are not in the competitive world than that are chasing that monkey, I guess I would say. I am scrolling on my phone here trying to find an article that you wrote here a little bit ago, and I'm doing this poorly, but as I recall, you were sort of talking about balance versus collection and sort of getting into that world. And I think those can be pretty misunderstood topics. So why don't you give us some of your
Oh
thoughts
yeah,
on?
totally. There's a lot of components to balance. So the first thing, I look for is like mental balance. So a horse has to, like, for me, like my favorite definition of balance is really the sweet spot between two extremes. And there is that mindset in the horse world. It's like, well, if a little bit is good, more must always be better. Well, that is hardly ever true. Like, I'm more like the story of Goldilocks and the Three Bears. That applies a lot more to horses, where it's like, yeah, it's like you got to look for the just right. That's usually somewhere in the middle. And so balance is part of that. So there's like mentally, you want the balance between a horse that's checked out, or super anxious. So you want a horse that's relaxed but alert. You want a horse that's in a frame of mind that's ready to learn, but not overly worried about it. Then physically, you want the balance, like in the way of going. You want the balance between a horse that's willing to go forward but not rushing. So you want to dial that into where it's like, okay, so this is like a balance between the desire to go forward and the relaxation that we've just worked on. So there's got to be that. Then there's like lateral balance, like the horse going to the left should feel like the horse going to the right, and that's like not nearly as simple as it may seem, as I'm sure you understand. But that's something that I always work on with every horse. It's like the right horse and the left horse should eventually feel like the same horse. So that's the kind of balance. And then eventually, with all of those balances in place, then you get to that longitudinal balance back to front, where you power up the hind end and you have the horse balance between the driving aids and the half halting aids. And then you have the forehand that gets lighter and the hind end that takes more weight, and the joints in the hindquarters that bend a little bit more. And that is then everything becomes light and effortless. That is ultimately collection. But people throw that word around so much, and it really bothers me. They're like, oh, now collect him up a little bit, and they just mean like pull his nose to his chest and make him go slower. That's not what collection is at all. That's not that at all. I mean, collection is something that you always work on, but never like separately. Like collection, I always say it's like, it's like fruit that falls from a tree, like this really like juicy peach that is growing on this tree, and you're like, wow, and then you can get it and it's no effort at all. But first you have to grow the tree, and you have to water it and take care of it, and it takes years. So yeah, collection isn't something that you can say, okay, now I collect the horse, okay, done. It's not like that at all. And when collection doesn't happen, and then it just becomes pulling and pushing, well, then you go back down the training scale, and you're like, all right, what do I not have? Do I need more straightness? Do I need more strength? Do I need do I need less of this and more of that? Like, what do I need to do? And then you try again. But yeah, you never just say, okay, now I collect the horse. God, that would be so nice and simple.
It's really not an action that the rider performs. That's absolutely true. I've always
No.
had exception with that phrasing as well. That's a dead giveaway that we're not speaking the same language, the other person and I, when that starts coming out. One other thing I always like to ask the higher level riders that I interview about is the concept of straightness, because I think that is also something that is highly, highly misunderstood. And I think the same way collection gets conflated with pulling back the reins and drawing the chin to the chest, to me, straightness, when people talk about it, what they really mean is stiffness. And I don't think straightness and stiffness are at all the same
Yeah,
thing.
and that's yeah,
So go ahead.
not at all. Not at all. So to that, I always yeah, straightness is like, to me, like there's the German school talks about first degree bend and second degree bend. So to me, straightness isn't straightness like a 2x4. I mean, that would be the stiffness you're talking about. That's not straightness at all. So straightness means like basic body alignment, like between the guardrails of a road. So like with the young horse, the guardrails are going to be pretty far apart, and then as the horse progresses, the guardrails are going to be closer together. And then the straightness just means like you're like the horse's chiropractor. So you want the whole entire horse to stay between those guardrails. And so then, you eventually get into this notion of second degree bend, which is when you can narrow the tracks of the hind legs and drive that inside hind leg a little closer under the body. And then you have that famous phrase, inside leg to outside rein. Well, that's where when that applies. And then the simple bend of a circle, which to me, that is straightness on a curved line or a straight line. And that's a collecting movement. And you can start chipping away at that if the horse is relaxed and otherwise ready. But yeah, straightness means a horse that bends evenly left and right, that doesn't bend the neck more than the rest of him. A horse where the front feet follow the hind feet, that is straightness. But it doesn't mean just the horse is always on a straight line. It doesn't mean that at all. It means a horse can develop power because the horse isn't cheating. Like a lot of the horses that are, most of the horses that are young or green, or like have been ridden incorrectly, they're crooked, and you know that. It's like you've got like one of my dressage clinicians that I rode with years and years ago. She compared it to her two ex-husbands, the horse's two hind feet. She said, yeah, one's the lazy ex-husband, and that one never pays the child support on time, and that we always have to call and nag and be on his case, and then the other ex-husband, like he's always on the ball and he can always depend on him, and that's the good hind leg. And then there's the lazy hind leg that always wants to step a little too far to the inside. And that's something that seems very nitpicky, but that is something that is always at the back of my mind with straightness. And it starts by keeping the horse between the guardrails, where you don't have one hind leg that's always stepping a little to the inside or the outside.
I like that too.
Does that make any sense to you?
No, it definitely does. One thing I have one of these articles. I don't know if you do this, but sometimes I start writing something and I get hung up. And I have an article right now that's probably 3 years old, and it's maybe three-quarters of the way being finished. And every once in a while I pick up on it and I work on it a little bit more, but I haven't figured out quite how to say what I'm trying to say yet. But the title of it is The Most Important Leg of Your Horse. And to me, the obvious answer to that is the outside hind. It is sort of what controls everything. And when we really get to an advanced horse that is developing collection and really has some power and drive to him, to me, the defining characteristic of that horse is a horse that doesn't leak the outside hind. And I've kind of always thought that was what that saying, inside leg to outside rein, is meaning. That outside rein is sort of the exterior boundary of your horse, and you can push up against it, but they don't evade the boundary and go beyond it. They hold that outside hind in the ground, and it kind of becomes a rail.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I always tell people, like, imagine you're going around a round pin, and so your outside rein and leg, that is the round pin, the wall of the round pin, and then your inside aids get the horse as close as possible to that round pin, but not through the wall of the round pin. Like that's, but of course, to do that, first you got to get the horse to move off the inside leg and to get the horse to leg yield, and then you establish that nice elastic boundary. I mean, some of my students that are coming from the a lot of formal dressage lessons, and they've heard outside rein so much that they pull on the outside rein, which is not what you're supposed to do at all. And it's another concept that drives me crazy. It's not about pulling back on the outside rein. It's just about having that welcoming boundary that you help the horse find, like a child would find an Easter egg. You're like, look, there it is. Like, let's go to it. And the horse is like, wow, there's a boundary. That's cool. And so, yeah, I think of it more that way. But you're exactly right. So you have that boundary in place, like once everything else is in place, and then you get to push the inside hind leg closer to that boundary, to where the tracks of the inside hind legs really narrow, and there's no evasion. And then the hind legs can step more under instead of like over to the side, and then the back can get more engaged, and everything feels just amazing.
I don't know why I've never watched you work horses at home, but just sort of knowing your personality a little bit and your own, you seem to do your own thing. How strictly do you stay with the classical exercises and the classical training scale? Like, are you doing a lot of shoulder in, haunches in, travers, renvers, and sort of those exercises for 2 years, or are you kind of pulling a little of the Western stuff off and playing around in the middle of the arena and doing some other things like we would be doing? Or how do you typically organize your rides in terms of what we would think of as strictly classical, and she's doing her own thing now?
Well, some of my, some of the strict dressage riders, they would definitely say, oh, she's doing her own thing and she's not a dressage rider at all. I disagree. I think I do a lot of the classical exercises, but I structure my rides a little differently. So yeah, I do get to like the shoulder in, the haunches in. I mean, those are genius exercises that help any horse become more balanced. And it's a lot of fun to get there. And it's a lot of joy, like to finally get like a nice half pass on a horse. The horses get really into it too. And then you start like the flying changes, and also like collecting and extending the gaits, like a little bit of shortening, a little bit of lengthening. It starts there. And so I play with that, because that's to me it's like, so I always say it's like the horse has to first learn to do yoga and say and relax, and really stretch and be like totally like in like a good mental space. And then from there we add the weightlifting, we add the power training. And so then, of course, when tension creeps in, then we go back to the yoga. So it's like, I always shift back and forth between those two. So when I feel like, okay, the horse is, like getting tired or bored or confused, well, then I go do something totally different. Then I might, I have a trail course set up, and then I might go and do some side passing over a log, or walk over the bridge, or up on the tires, or whatever. I might go for a little trail ride before I start a work session. I try to not, drill any exercises. So I do the classical exercises, and I do always have the training scale in the back of my head, but I am a little more creative, like when I need to reestablish relaxation, when I need to say, okay, now, this is enough of that. Then I'm like, okay, well, there's other things we can do, like, try to open and close the gate, for example, and then we go back to doing something, more dressage. Does that answer your question?
Yes, ma'am. I too.
But yeah, the shoulder and haunches and all that, they're great exercises. I recommend those.
It has taken me a long time to embrace the shoulder in. I have a very strong dislike of untracking of the hindquarters too much. And I have to actually give Patrick King credit for one of the things that he said that just kind of struck me was about haunches in is about strengthening the inside hind leg. And we're putting it in such a position that it's required to do most of the work for the horse. And we've swapped sides, and here we have helped to strengthen the horse to allow him to do other maneuvers. So it's the shoulder in is not the goal; it is simply a tool toward a goal. But I really, really do not like watching a horse, or like the feel of riding a horse doing that for a long time. Some of the other maneuvers, Travers and Renber's, I'm a big fan of. That particular one, for whatever reason, I have just always hated. So I will ask you now, do you have a particular classic exercise that you hate but wish you didn't hate, or would be embarrassed to admit that you absolutely hate this one? You got to have at least liked and a most favored. So what are your least liked and most favored of the classical exercises?
Well, it's like I'm a big fan of the shoulder in, first of all, and I encourage you to revisit that, because really it's not, it really is, to me, like it gives you access to the power of the horse's inside hind leg, like on a straight line, like wherever. So it's like it's a genius exercise if you really think about it. So yeah, I do the shoulder in a lot, and then of course you complementarily do the haunches in and the half pass. I mean, I absolutely love those. Now, the exercises that I dislike is well, there aren't really any I totally dislike. There's just some I'm not very good at, like the really more advanced ones. Like I've played with half steps. I've never, I've ridden a couple of schoolmaster horses in my life. I'm not saying I'm an expert at teaching a horse to piaffe and passage. I would like to, but to me, that is like a lot of what I've seen, and I would like to learn how to do it better. But a lot of what I've seen in clinics is just like, well, it's like, so you're basically teaching the horse go, but don't go. And then the horse gets confused. And I'm thinking, yeah, I've seen really good people do that, but most people aren't that good at it. And yeah, that's something that I'm not really willing to mess with until I know how to do it better and without all the tension that keeps in. I mean, it's like I've seen people do try to teach a horse to piaffe, and it's just teaching the horse to fear the person standing behind him with the whip. I mean, that can't be the point of it. And I know what the point of it is in my head. I just don't trust myself to go there.
Yeah, I would think that's one of those things like I'm more in the colt starting world, but anybody that does start a lot of colts and gets really good at it is going to look back at those first three or four that they started and just realize that it was a train wreck. I would imagine even for really high
Oh
level
my God.
horses. I
Oh my
think,
God.
yeah, the first three or four horses
I spent like, yeah.
I think the first three or four horses you teach the piaffe to is probably the same deal. They're just going to have to survive it, and you're going to get better, and the 12th horse is going to maybe be okay. But I think there's no way the first few is going to turn out really well. You're going to screw them up. There's just no way to avoid it. It's going to happen. Did I lose you?
Learn more about that and get to that level. But I know what you're talking about with starting colts. I often wish like I spent like 20 years or so mostly starting colts for other people, and I made a living that way. And now I'm like, God, I wish I could go back to these horses and apologize for all the things that I did that I would never do now, and the stuff I used that I would never use now, and and tying their noses to the back of the saddle and leaving them there. I'm like, God, what was I thinking? But everybody I worked for did it, so I did it too, and I didn't think anything was wrong with it. And yeah, I mean, it takes you a long time to figure out certain things, like, does that really serve my horse? But yeah, I wish I could have a time machine and travel back and then tell those horses, look, I'm really, really sorry.
Well, it's all part of it. A lot of them get the benefit of all you've learned, so it's just the way that it goes that a few of them get the flip side of that while you are learning. So, and that's okay. In my experience, at least with the typical customer that I'm dealing with, I feel like a lot of them need acceptance or permission to not be very good yet. I see a lot of people that are apologizing. They're working on something and they're struggling with it, and they get a little frustrated. Then they start looking at me and they start apologizing, and I'm going, you have nothing to be sorry for. This is difficult. You're gonna not do very well at it for a little while, and then you're gonna not be as bad, and it's going to be a while before you're actually anything we could call good at this, and that's to be expected on the front end. So it's perfectly fine that you're not good yet. You're not supposed to be good yet. Do you have a similar setup with your customers? You find that they
Oh,
sort of need permission?
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, they need permission and they need reassurance that it's okay, that I'm not judging them for not being perfect. And that's, I think, rampant in the dressage world, where there is, ill-conceived perfectionism that really doesn't work that well. Whereas, like, oh well, this could be better, this could be better. Saying, okay, for today, this is good enough. Like I always encourage them to look back to where you and your horse were 6 months ago, and tell me we haven't made great progress. So I'm really trying in my barn to cultivate an atmosphere of acceptance and inclusivity and mutual support. And when people get discouraged, and they do, and they think that progress is slow, or they're not making progress, and then I always say, look, next time I take a lesson with Nicole, next time Nicole reminds me of all the things I'm doing wrong, I invite you to come and stand on the fence, and you will realize that we're all working on the same thing. Maybe it's slightly different junctions in the road, but it's really it's I go through the same thing. I drive home from the barn a lot of the time thinking, my God, I charge people money for this. I completely sucked today, and then the next day is better. I mean, it's, that's just life. And that is how we learn. I mean, it would be a lot worse if the people that I despair with are the ones who think they know everything, and they have those preconceived notions, and that they have nothing to learn, and all they're looking for is reassurance. That's a lot harder, but I get that a lot more rarely. I get a lot more common what you're describing. People who think like, oh my God, I'm just a trail rider, I don't know anything. And I'm like, no, actually, you know how to steer and stop your horse, you know how to walk and trot your horse. That's a lot. That's more than a lot of people know.
Yeah, I don't really know what to do with the people that think they've got it figured out. I can't imagine being at a place where I'm not being critical of what I'm doing, and seeing small mistakes that like one thing I try to be pretty honest about, because I don't hear many clinicians saying this, is that I misjudge horses all the time. As many colts as I've started, I still have moments every day where I thought he could take that, and I pushed him a little. The reaction I got was more than I was expecting. I wish I hadn't pushed quite that hard in that moment, or whatever, where I kind of misjudge a horse a little bit, and that should be a cardinal sin of someone that does that for a living. But the reality is, we all misjudge horses all the time. Just maybe the degree I misjudge them
Yeah,
is a little slighter than someone else, but it still happens where I need to adjust and learn. And that horse told me new information. I thought I had him figured out, but it turns out there's a little more complexity to him than I thought there was, or whatever. And so we are always trying to improve. One of the sayings I really like is that what you struggle with today will one day be your warm up. A year from now,
yeah, that's good. Yeah.
yeah, you'll still be struggling, but it won't be the same thing you're struggling with today, hopefully, right? Oh,
Yeah, no, absolutely. But I think, it's like that's a really good thing you just said, because there's so many clinicians who would never admit they make a mistake. And to me, that's like a big part of what I do. It's like, okay, well, I'm trying this. Okay, well, that didn't work. All right, let's try something else now. I mean, that's a big part of, I mean, it's not a hard science. They're horses. So we're like always like, okay, so how can I, maybe make this a little more clear? Okay, well, that obviously the horse, didn't really respond to that. So let's do it in a different way. And it's the same with teaching. I mean, there's all those things where I'm thinking, oh God, I could have done this differently or that. And that is how we learn.
absolutely. How boring would it be if you just mastered everything? You'd be bored in a week, right?
Oh, that would be awful. Yeah, no, that will never happen.
Well, you said two words in there I was struggling to find. You said exclusion and inclusion, and also judgment. And that brings me to maybe a twist in our conversation here, but it was a conversation that you and I were involved in that I felt like never wrapped up, and that was at the Best Horse Practices Summit. We were both on a Q&A panel, and we got a question about, and again, I'm struggling for the current politically correct word, I guess, diversity and inclusiveness within the horse world. My perspective on it was that when you looked at the group of us, you could see that we're mostly white people, or that we were about half male and half female, or a lot of things, but there were a lot of different ways to slice that pie up. So we had two non-Americans, we had people of different sexual orientations. We had, on the panel we were sitting there with, we had a Buddhist, a Mormon, a Catholic, a Jew, and an atheist all sitting up there. We had parents of adoptive children with mixed race families. I felt like if you actually knew all of the people involved, we were an incredibly diverse group of people who the horse had brought together. If you're looking at it through some of these basic labels and prisms, then you might just see women and men, or white people, or something like that. So we touched on this a little bit earlier, but you are a non-native, you are a woman, you are married to a non-native who is of Hispanic origin, and so what are your thoughts on this diversity
Yeah,
conversation
I
going
think
on right now?
yeah, thanks for wanting to go there, and thanks for bringing this back up, because I felt like we didn't really concluded, we didn't really come to a like we didn't really take it where it needed to go. And and I think you're right. I mean, I think there's more diversity at the Best Horse Practices Summit than in a lot of other horse related worlds and places that you could go to. I also think it's like there's like some division that again between English and Western. Like dressage is a lily white sport, and there's hardly any, like, the people that are not white in the dressage world are the people that clean the stalls. That's why my husband, who is he's Chicano, he's Mexican American, like he says, it's like, yeah, he's been really uncomfortable at some of the barns where I've worked, because he feels like when he comes in, like the people will look at him and then try to hand him a pitchfork. And that's not really what he's there for. He's my husband. And, he doesn't really do that. So, so that there is that side of the horse world, and it's probably worse in dressage than in other parts. I have those conversations a lot with an older friend of mine who comes from the tradition of barrel racing and rodeo. And she says, and we always talk about the Western tradition of riding that is a lot more inclusive traditionally than the English one. Because like in Europe, riding horses was like the exclusive domain of the landed gentry, like the people who had the money and the land, they got to ride horses, and the poor tenant farmers didn't. Whereas then here, like out west, well, it's like, yeah, you ride because it's, horse is a means of transportation, and if you can ride it, you can ride it. And in rodeo, it's a very democratic kind of a sport. Like, you stay on or you fall off. It doesn't matter what you look like. And so that's that's the difference. Well, yeah, wouldn't you agree? Like there's Native American rodeo, there's black rodeo. I mean, it's like a very that's a very diverse sport. I love that about it. And if you even here, like in New Mexico, if you look at like the barrel racing world, or it's like any of that, or even it's there's a lot of diversity there. There's that's practiced on the Navajo reservation and everywhere. That said, I do think if you look at your standard group of horse people, that is that's there are a lot more white people than you'd expect, and even at the Best Horse Practices Summit, there was Nashon, and then there was the rest of us, and maybe one other person or two. And so I'm like, okay, we can maybe do better than that. And I'm not accusing you or anybody else of being racist, other than in the way that we all are, because we've been swimming around in the toxic soup for 400 years. But I do think it's like, if like I'm always looking like, how can we make it to where people like recognize themselves? How can there be more role models? Like how can there be like a Venus and Serena Williams of of equestrian sports? I mean, that sort of thing. And USDF has picked up on that, and they're trying to be a little more inclusive. But that's something that's always at the back of my mind. And I think it's like horses are good for people, and I mean horses are really good for all people. And there's, I think, a lot of kids from backgrounds that that are different from ours, who would never really think of taking up horseback riding, and that's because they don't see anybody else that looks like them. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
I have a lot of that I would agree with. I have some points of it that I would disagree with. I think the horse world, in my experience, is a fairly, at least on the professional side, is a fairly motley crew. You have a lot of interesting characters that have backgrounds you wouldn't expect in this business, which is part of why I think it's fun to talk to them. Like I was not raised, even though I'm you're a white guy, I was not raised in a family that had horses or anything like that. I was just a very horse crazy kid, and didn't matter what kind of cage you put me in, I was going to find my way out of it to a horse. And so I'm also all about any sort of kid that wants to be around horses. I will go through a lot of trouble to make that happen. I think that's a wonderful experience, but I don't think that we should be going out of our way to offer certain things to certain groups. I don't like the idea of identifying people into a group just because they happen to be from an urban background, or they're black, or they're Mexican, or they're whatever. I'm generally trying to look at people kind of like horses, as individuals. Maybe you're a thoroughbred, but you're the laziest thoroughbred I've ever met. You don't necessarily fit the norm of what a thoroughbred is supposed to be, right? And if I treat you like all the hot thoroughbreds are supposed to be, I'm not going to get you trained. I had better recognize what you are as an individual and handle you that way. And I think the people out there that really want to be around horses are going to find a way to them, just like I did. And I think it's okay that you wind up with certain activities or genres or professions or whatever that don't wind up with a perfect 50-50 mix of however you want to cut the pie. It's okay that the NBA is mostly black. I don't have a problem with that. If you
I don't have a problem with that either. I mean, And I don't have a problem with the NBA being mostly black. I think that's, but I think the difference there is that horses really are, I mean, that's something I believe, and I think you believe it too, that horses are actually fundamentally good for people.
for sure.
And they make us better people. So I'm like, okay, so expanding access to horses is like a really positive thing.
I would certainly agree with that statement. Yes, ma'am. I mean, one thing, I don't know if you're aware of this, but the horse world is shrinking and rapidly. Since about 2007, a full third of the horses in the United States have gone away. We've gone from, since 2007, we've gone from about 10.4 million to about 7.2 million horses. So that's actually a little bit more than a third.
That's
So
really worrisome.
it worries me a lot too. So I'm all about expanding the horse world, and I don't believe in a mentality of I'm going to keep this for myself or anything like that. I just don't know that this notion of making things equal or handicapping the race or giving this particular group
No, 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 no.
a
It's
benefit.
not about
Yeah,
creating a perfect proportion. No, it's not about that at all, Daniel. It's just about creating opportunities for people that might not otherwise have had them. I mean, I was like you, I didn't have the opportunity. I created it, but I also had an easier time creating it because I had within bicycling distance, I had a couple of barns that I could go to and hang out in and eventually find, horses to ride in and all of that. So I had those opportunities. And there's a lot of kids that don't have those opportunities. And maybe if the opportunities were there and we took, a little bit, more we were a little bit more creative in creating those opportunities, and then there would be the good things could happen. That's all I'm saying.
no, I agree with that. Again, I'm not trying to say anybody needs to be excluded. I mean, one of the programs I was with for a long time was the Boy Scouts of America, and I actually ran a horsemanship program for them, and I put hundreds of kids on horses for their first ride and that kind of stuff, and they were about as diverse a group of kids as you could have. I guess
Yeah, and I bet a few of them stuck with it, and you changed their lives. I mean, that's something
I would
that's
hope.
huge.
Yes, ma'am. I would hope. I don't know if that's true, but who knows? You may have that kid come up to you in 20 years and says, "Hey, you're the guy that changed everything for me." But so anyway, that's sort of my view on it. Like I have known when I was apprenticing, particularly, there were several young women that I knew that always had a chip on their shoulder about being a girl and always felt like they were, treated differently because they were a girl and all. And in my experience, to a degree, they were, but it was in the opposite direction of what they thought. They were given more leeway and allowed to make mistakes that I would have been fired for. But because they were a girl, but they never saw it that way. They always thought that the standard was higher for them and so forth. And I never saw it that way at all. And I have to say that all of those girls that had the chip on their shoulder, they're no longer in the business. The
Well,
ones
yeah, and
that
it's not good to have a chip on your shoulder, of course not. But let me tell you a story from when I was apprenticing, and yeah, I didn't have my green card yet, and the people I worked for who were pretty, ruthless Western pleasure trainers, yeah. So the guy started hitting on me, and his wife was the main trainer, and she was right there. That didn't concern him, and it was getting pretty uncomfortable, and it's like, yeah, and then he started telling me, it's like, well, it's like if you, like if you, sleep with me and have my child, and maybe you could like get a green card and stay there for that, which would have never worked. I mean, there were some things going on that were pretty horrendous, and that I'm glad nothing worse than that happened. But yeah, it's like that got really really uncomfortable. I had nowhere to go. I had no way to defend myself. Like I was being put under all sorts of pressure, and it's like, okay, well, you are basically you are just German meat here for my taking, and you don't have a green card. I can do whatever I want. So that's the kind of thing you run into.
sure.
Yeah, so no, it's not all that you get breaks.
Yes, but like that's what the way I look at it is you met an individual who happened to be a shitty guy. It isn't like an industry standard that
Right.
things are across the board run that way. You just like you might run
No, I'm not
into
saying that they are,
yeah,
but No, it's not an industry standard. Thank goodness. There were other people too, but it is, it's like an unequal world that we live in. And all I'm saying is like we should maybe take some steps to make it like make access to horses a tiny bit more equal. Not, like enforcing people who don't really want to do it to be around horses, but it's like if there's opportunities, if there's role models, if there's like this sense of inclusivity in there. I blame the English world and the dressage world more than anybody, because that is like a trademark of a lot of those English riding disciplines. Exclusivity is there and arrogance is there, and that drives me absolutely crazy. That's another thing that makes me like the Western world a lot more, because that you don't really see that like that. Like you tend to be more accepted for what you are, and maybe that's where you're coming from, but I see the other side too. And like being a woman apprenticing at a Western pleasure barn, like that did not turn out very well for me, and I was lucky to get out of there when I did.
So
I mean, those people were
of the Western pleasure trainers that I know, I would be more concerned with my son having that issue there than my daughter. So you maybe found
that's probably
the
true.
oddball there.
That's true in the hunter jumper world too, probably. No, I mean, but no, there's shitty individuals, but then there's also like a culture that kind of enables that, and that's all I'm saying. And there's like pockets of that. I'm not saying the entire culture, but there's definitely pockets of it, and I know I've lived there.
Sure. Well, so what would,
and I know that when I first got together with my husband, I was still apprenticing at a and I first got together with my husband. Yeah. So that was it. Yeah. I was still apprenticing. I was still working for some pretty shitty Western show people. And yeah, so like he didn't know anything about horses, but he was Mexican. So he'd come and, and come pick me up, and they would just basically expect him to like sweep the barn aisle and whatever. And I was like, no, and so there was some, and so the person that I worked for, that was, so the trainer that I worked for, she took me to the side and she said, oh, well, if you stay with this guy, then you're going to have a baby every year and learn how to make tortillas. Is that what you want out of life? And I was like, no. And I still to this day, I haven't learned how to make tortillas. I can cook a lot of other things, but yeah, David has never expected me to do that. And we've been married for 32 years now. But yeah, so it's like, yeah, you can say that's a shitty individual and that's not representative, and I hope you're right and I think you're right, but those people exist.
So I can proudly tell you I make a hell of a good tortilla myself. I'm quite a cook. Yeah, I actually cook more than my wife does. She might disagree with that, but I promise you that's true. So anyway, well, what would you say then?
You have April on the podcast to keep it straight.
If we agree that there is this problem, then what would you propose as a solution to it? How do you make it more inclusive? How do you equalize opportunities? I don't think there's a grand scale answer there, but in again, individual pockets, you can affect those things as individual people do. So what do you suggest to make that happen?
I've thought about this a lot. Like I was thinking like about, just it's really hard because how do we make it more diverse? It's like, we can't just, be all ham-handed about it and say, well, we need to like get 50% of non-white people showing in dressage. That's not going to happen. That's not realistic, and that's, I don't think, would get us anywhere. But like maybe like offering opportunities, offering scholarships, offering saying, look, this is if you want to learn about horses, this is what we have to offer, like reaching more into places where you wouldn't maybe think to reach out to, that sort of thing.
Okay. Well, this is the part of that, I guess you could call it the slippery slope that scares me about that. I am a big proponent of the meritocracy. So people getting opportunities based upon merit and nothing else. I really am not a bigoted kind of person. I don't care if you're black, white, gay, straight, man, woman, whatever. It's the best person that is the person I want to see excel there, which unfortunately does not happen all the time. But like this is the poster child of the argument against that for me. Is you have United Airlines, whose CEO made the statement that in 2023, the major goal of the airline was to hire pilots based solely on diversity. And I'm thinking, I kind of want the best pilots.
Well, they still have to be pilots. They still have to know how to fly an airplane.
Well, they're not.
Well, I don't think they would just hire random people
No,
fly an airplane.
I don't think they're highly, but every spectrum has a lower third to it. And anytime, it's just the way that math and statistics work. Anytime you look into a minority spread across that spectrum, there are going to be fewer and fewer people in the upper end. And so if you are hiring based upon that, like engineers, if you wanted to have a company with 50% male and female engineers, and in engineering, women are about an eighth of the group there. If you are looking to hire your firm 50% female engineers, then mathematically, by definition, you're going to have lower quality engineers in the female half of the company, just because there aren't enough of them to.
Yeah, this I would say then you got to start earlier than engineers. You got to start in elementary school and grade school, and there it still is true that girls are often getting the message that math really isn't for them, and they end up doing other things that that coincidentally channel them into professions that pay a lot lower than engineering. So I think it starts a lot earlier than once you're an actual engineer or a pilot.
So I'll say
and
this,
I think it's it's not so much that there are all out. All right.
I'm sorry, you broke up on the last part there.
No, you say what you're going to say. I was, yeah.
So I was like, I've never been a woman. I've never been a girl. I have two sisters, so I was raised with. There were more girls in the family than guys. I maybe just was oblivious and never noticed, but in my lifetime, now I think in the 60s and the 70s, that the discouraging of girls from math and all was certainly happening. And Dr. King has told some stories of that, of things that she's witnessed. I don't know that in my generation I have witnessed that sort of thing. I can definitely say that as a father of two sons that are now school age, I am seeing the discouragement of boys and sort of the handicapping of the race where they're told not to compete and so forth, so that enough girls will win and those sorts of things. And that I find disturbing and contrary to the meritocracy. And that may be isolated just in my little area and some of the things that I have seen, but I mean, to me, it should all be about, just like with a horse, we're trying to find straightness, the middle of those two outside boundaries. And when we decide that there's too much on the left, that doesn't mean that a whole lot more of the right is the solution. We're trying to bring it to center, not to the other extreme. And that's the part that I fear with some of this social engineering,
Well, I don't think that, I don't really like, I'm coming from a different place than you. And, I can see your concern and sympathize with it. I definitely think that masculinity in this country is in a crisis. I've been following that. And, there's definitely like a shift happening, and that leaves a lot of, white males at a loss. Like, where do we go from here? Who are we now? Like, things are changing. And I have empathy for that. I totally get that. But on the other hand, I don't think we're in any danger of the other extreme. I think the meritocracy, the problem there is that people don't start out like on that same level ground. Like, if everybody started on the same ground, on the same spot, well then yes, like, okay, so let the best person win. But that's like over generations and generations that that isn't really happening. So it's like you've got some people who start out like in a place that's way behind the others. And so it's like I think I'm not talking about social engineering. I'm just talking about just making the opportunities to where the meritocracy can work as a meritocracy.
Sure. I think I'm all for equal opportunities, but I think when we handicap the races so that we have equal outcomes, that is a very dangerous. Like for instance, again, if I look at the Best Horse Practices Summit, I think the most common thing I have heard said there was more along the lines of diversity of race. So, and they're probably meaning white and black. We had Nishan, who was the sole black guy, or the sole among the clinicians, he was the only black guy, but he was one of 8. And statistically speaking, or demographically speaking, Black people make up 12 and a half, 13, 14% of the population, with 12.5% is 1/8. So we actually had an accurate representation of his race amongst the group of presenters.
Well, and that's great, but that's the best horse practices. Like you've been in other environments, and you know that's not not
Sure.
always the case. And Sean, I had a long talk with him, and he's told me some stories about where he got discouraged, and he was mistaken for the groom, and all of that, and so that is a reality. And that's all I'm talking about. I'm not talking about giving people unfair advantages. I'm just thinking of making the world a fairer place.
Sure. But I mean, here's the flip side of that. Did either of y'all ever ask me if I've been mistaken for the groom as a white guy? I've been the groom,
Oh, I've
groom,
been the groom too. I mean, I've
yeah,
been the barn manager. I've been the mucker. I mean, I've been all
yeah.
of that.
As the apprentice trainer, just because I was a white guy doesn't mean I got high levels of respect from the customers and so forth. We get treated differently
No, that's not
as
what
well.
I'm. Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's great. And I appreciate that you came up similar to the way I came up. Like we worked for what we got, and I can totally see why you believe in the meritocracy, because for you that worked out well, and you worked for it, and you worked really hard for it, and you're very proud of what you've done. As am I. I mean, I've worked my tail off to get where I am. But there's other people where there's always like a ceiling there. Like I mean, like if you like it's the meritocracy, the meritocracy has its limits there. There's people that it's like if you're Mexican and you work in a show horse barn, and I've seen this, like you're gonna reach the limit where it's like you never get to actually do the riding and the showing. It's like you'll be the head groom, maybe, you'll get some respect that way, but you'll never be the person that gets up into that fancy saddle and gets all the respect.
So, so see, I would say to that, I came up in the cutting world, but have you ever heard of the Banuelos family? Because they're the actual example of that not happening. The older well, I don't think he's the older brother, but Ascension Banuelos came across as a wetback and started out as a groom and worked his way into a saddle and became one of the top cutting horse trainers, and then brought his brothers into I mean, they became a powerhouse family of cutting from exactly that sort of background. So I guess that's just
And
sort of
that's
my thought.
great.
Everybody
And
looks
that's
at the
great.
minorities that don't make it, but they don't take into the account that the majority of the majority group doesn't make it to that level either. It's very
No, I
hard
know.
for everyone to reach that level, regardless of what particular label or group identity you might have. By definition, very, very few of any group ever reach those sorts of levels. So, that's my perspective. Again, most of the time when I see the people that are given, and I'm not including you or Nishan or anybody else in this group. I think y'all are all great people. I think the world of you, and that's part of why I'm willing to have this sort of conversation with you. And I hope that's mutual.
I
And
appreciate it.
it's definitely not that
Yeah,
I'm I'm
absolutely.
I'm accusing you or anyone else of anything specifically, but I have known people who really had sort of, again, that sort of chip on their shoulder, always thought the reason that they hadn't made it was because of this group identity that they have. And again, I'm sitting in the back looking at them going, no, the reason you haven't made it is because you're not good enough. You have given yourself this excuse and quit trying, and you're stuck right where you are because you now have this excuse of you can't make it because of X, rather than still grinding. And still, all of the top trainers that I know are the kind of guys that, or ladies, that are up at 4 o'clock in the morning working their butts off, still working lots of horses, and they are making a habit of excellence. I really can't think of very many that have reached that level that did genuinely deserve to be there. I've known a few, but they are the exception, not the rule, for sure. So And I don't know, maybe we're just arguing in circles here. I'm not trying to just start an argue with you or anything, and I certainly respect the hell out of you and all. So again, I'm not aiming any of this at you directly. I just don't think that perfect world of everyone having the same opportunity, I don't think that's realistically possible. And I don't think that some of these group labels
No,
that
it
we
may
put on.
not be realistically possible.
Mhm.
It doesn't have to be realistically possible, but it's like what I'm never going to quit trying is to make it a little bit better, making it a little bit more equitable. And I think that's a reasonable goal. I'm not saying that we ought to, like that we gotta, shoot for like perfect percentages of different ethnicities in show horses. No, I'm just, talking about, okay, horses are good for all people, as you and I certainly agree on. And like, let's, maybe be a little more inclusive and expand those opportunities a little bit, and then maybe there'll be like some kid or some apprentice who will have an opportunity they wouldn't otherwise have had, and we can feel good about that. I mean, that's all I'm saying.
I'm
It's
completely on board with every bit of that. Yep. So,
okay, good.
all right. Well, what else? Now that I've made everything awkward, what else can we chat about? You've written two books: Ride with Feel, a guide for the rest of us, and Dressage for all of us. So you are definitely living the life and putting yourself where your mouth is in making things accessible to everyone. So how would you define, after having written a book on riding with feel, how do you define or approach what feel is? Because I certainly agree with you. It is not an easy concept to pin down and explain. Um, so how do you go about that?
So yeah, so feel is, so if you think of riding a horse or being with the horse as a two-way conversation, it's yeah, that's how I think about it. It's like, so it's like, so generally, like, we learn, like when we learn how to ride, it's okay, you tell the horse what to do. It's like you're the boss, you tell the horse what to do. You give the horse like all those imperatives, do this, do that. To me, feel is like the other part of that coin. It's like our willingness and ability to listen to what the horse has to say about it. So that is feel, like the horse's side of the conversation, like being able and willing to understand that, that's feel.
Okay. Would you say that the horse is always right? Like, is it
No.
is it okay?
No, no, we've got, yeah, so we've no, I'm not one of those people. No, so the horse has like an input, and we got to be willing to listen to it, but we don't always say yes, 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 you go ahead, you do what you think is best. That's really, I mean, that is not what makes a partnership better. No, so we've got our reasonable requests, and that's like another part of feel, is to think, okay, so what can I ask this horse right now to keep my request polite and reasonable, and then be able to say, wow, that was good. So and that's something that I'm always learning, and always fine-tuning, and always trying to teach people, like, what is the right thing to ask for. That's the art of timing. So it's like, what is a good thing to ask that horse that I can ask for? I'm pretty sure that horse is gonna actually see the point in it and do what I'm asking, and then I get to release and reward. I mean, that's what feel is really for, to create that. And then the horse feels like, okay, we're accomplishing something, and then the horse gets on board with the program, and then the horse and I in the end will want the same thing, ideally. But no, there are times when the horse says, like, I would like to go graze over there, and I'm like, hell no. So yeah, that happens too.
Okay. Well, I don't know if you have run into any of these people or had to deal with them, but we now have a movement of the horse giving its consent, and it started in the positive reinforcement only world, but it is certainly leaking out into the Western world, and particularly some of the more emotional sides of the Western world, which is the next topic I wanted to get into with you. And I have always viewed training a horse as a fairly parent-child type of a relationship. So we're not equals. I am in charge of you, and I am here to make decisions that you may not like at times. So, for instance, if I were to ask my 11-year-old if I had his consent to wake him up tomorrow morning to go to school, there's a high likelihood, if I went with his consent, that he would never go to school, right? I mean, sometimes we have to say, well, I understand you don't like this, but you got to eat your peas anyway, right? Because that's what's good for you. And so I kind of find this idea of consent from the horse. I understand it on an idealistic level, and I certainly want my horse, like you just said, to want to do these things with me that I'm asking of him. But at the same time, expecting that on a minute to minute basis and deciding that we must come to a halt if we ever lose his consent, I think is an absurd notion that will lead to many
That is, I'm
magnificent
totally
problems.
with you there. I think that is, yeah. And that does not lead to a good horse rider relationship. I get a lot of people like that who are like, that makes them very nervous when, I tell them, it's like, no, it's okay to tell your horse to do something. Like, oh, but then he won't love me anymore. It's like, no, it's not like that. It is not like that. The key is to keep your requests to where they're well timed and reasonable, and then you get to say, okay, that was good. And yeah, ideally we do want the same thing. Ideally the horse says, oh, that's a great idea, and I love it when that happens, but realistically that's not always going to happen. The horse says, oh, I think I'm done now. And then I have to say, well, we're going to do this for a little longer. Thank you. And, then things are good. And then we expand our comfort zones, and we expand, what we're comfortable doing. But then the horse also learns to trust me more and say, okay, well, she's not going to ask me anything that's going to be super unpleasant. She's not going to ask me anything that's super painful. I'm going to try to do better. It's like, there's usually some kind of release. There's some kind of reward. I mean, that to me is what it's all about. But people misunderstand that into thinking, okay, I can't ask my horse anything. I just always have to do what my horse wants. And to me, that's not very safe, for one thing. I mean, as you've probably witnessed, that's also, that doesn't, the horse doesn't really know. Horses like boundaries. Horses can like to know where they are. And as long as you're consistent and you're like, this rule always applies, this boundary is always up, and then they can count on that, and then they relax, and then they're a lot more with you, and they like that. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's I can understand where the positive reinforcement movement is coming from. I won't really like go there all the way, because I think sometimes you can't always. I mean, I try to use a lot of positive reinforcements, but there are times when a clear, firm no, and then you move on and you're done with, is the best thing to do, and every horse can take that. I've never met a horse that couldn't.
Yes, ma'am. I also feel like the notion of positive reinforcement to me is at odds with the notion of feel. So part of what I try to work my brain around with feel, I try to explain it as I'm playing the hot or cold game with my horse. And that's part of feel. Like when I pick up reins, I don't have as a default 1 pound of pressure or 10 pounds of pressure. How much pressure I'm applying on the reins is a direct response to how the horse is responding to the pressure I have on the reins. So if they're getting further and further out of position, I have more and more pressure. If they're getting closer and closer to the position, then they get less and less pressure, and so forth. And to me, that's how I think of feel.
That's an example of a boundary that's in place. Yeah, exactly.
And positive reinforcement does not take that into account. It is more of a black and white and on off sort of a thing. There's never the little more pressure if you're getting a little further away, less pressure if you're getting closer, which to me is the most. It takes some time for a person to master when they're working a horse, but if you master it, the horses respond to it great. Yeah, they just come right along once you could get that working for you. So
yeah, it really is like a conversation that you're describing. It goes both ways, and so you're reading the horse, you're feeling the horse, you adjust what you do based on that information, and then the horse is more and more with you, and then that's a beautiful feeling, right? But yeah, that with the positive reinforcement, where it's always like the click and the treat, I'm like, that's too standardized for me. I mean, I could never do that. And he's like, I'd never say never. I mean, there's a couple of horses in my barn that have real anxiety problems. And then there are occasions when, I will feed them a treat, just to get their mind off stuff. But, that's not this constant thing for me. I don't go around carrying a pouch of treats on my person. I think that's a stupid thing to do. It's there's a time and a place for most things, including an occasional treat. But I mean, I don't think that that's the only tool we should have in our toolkit. And people are always looking for very simple solutions, and that click and the treat, I mean, that's I think that's probably, if you're working with dolphins, that's a great way to train the dolphin, because that's like the only way we have to communicate.
Mm-hmm.
since the dolphin is living in the water and we don't, and we can't really follow the dolphin there. So we're like, okay, so that's something we can do. But with the horse, we can communicate. I mean, that to me is the most beautiful thing about riding. It's fascinating. It's like, okay, so our back and my core muscles, they talk to the horse's back directly, and those little shifts that I do, there goes the horse, and they can read that. And that to me is just amazing that they let us do that at all, and that we can have that conversation. So yeah, to me, like a click and a treat, that would really disrupt that process and get me out of my zone, and I wouldn't enjoy that nearly as much.
I completely agree. I kind of like that there are people out there that are playing with that, but I really view it as a fringe sort of a thing that's going to maybe give us a valid point of information here and there, but I don't think it can ever be pragmatic or realistic. I don't think there's ever a time where being a purist for that is going to be the best outcome for the horse. Sort of like you were saying, and I'm losing my thought on what you said. I had it, and now it's escaping me. So to me, becoming a good horseman or horsewoman is all about gaining more and more tools in your toolbox. So like we said before, you misread the horse, or this doesn't go the way it normally goes.
Yeah.
You have a plan B and another way that you can approach this and get something done. And those people ignore all tools except for one. And I think that's to the detriment of the horse, not to a virtuous end, as I think they believe. But I guess it's a free country. We all get to approach it the way we want to approach it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it would be boring if we all did the same thing. And I think, there's a time and a place for the positive reinforcement. Like if a horse that has real anxiety and, all of that, well, then, it's like, yeah, that's, kind of what I do too, except that I don't actually use the clicker, but, I kind of agree with the philosophy there. But then there's some horses that have very different issues. And then the click and the treat doesn't work nearly as well. Like when the horse is walking all over me, then, it's like, well, I mean, yeah, there's probably a way to approach that. I don't know enough about it, but yeah, it's, I mean, to me, just the concept of walking around with like this pouch of treats on my body, I'm like, I'd rather not.
Yeah,
I'd rather not do that. And when I'm with the horse and we're talking to each other, I don't want to interrupt it all the time to say, okay, now I'm going to feed you another treat.
For sure. It is a distraction from the conversation, for sure. Well, the last thing, I've kept you a little while here, and I know it's getting late. So the last thing I wanted to ask you about was your foray into Western dressage, which seems to have been a pretty successful avenue for you. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that world? I've talked a little bit about Western dressage on the podcast before, but you're the first person that I've had on that really is directly involved in it. So why don't you tell us a little bit about some of the rules and the challenges that you find in that world, some of the similarities and differences and all.
Okay, yeah, gladly. Western dressage is a really cool thing. It's like the fastest growing equestrian discipline, today, or one of them. And I think a lot of the people like me who are tending to get a little disillusioned with classical dressage are finding themselves in the Western dressage. So when I first came back to dressage, when I first fell back in love with dressage in the 1990s, when I first went out on my own as a trainer, everybody showed the horses they had in classical dressage. So like I showed like quarter horses and Morgans and Arabians, and I did pretty well at the lower levels, and it was fun, and it was just a lot of, I was like, wow, this is a sport that's inclusive, and that's always my main the main thing that I'm looking for, that is like, yeah, I can show up with the horse, and with correct training we can do okay, and we can hold our own, and we can have a good time there. And so so that was that I really enjoyed that. And then over the last 20 years, I mean, probably in the East a little sooner, here in New Mexico, it's a pretty recent thing. So now you go to a recognized dressage shows, and all the horses there are horses who are born and bred for the sport for I don't know how many generations. So if I showed up with the horses I showed there in the 1990s, I'd be laughed out of the ring. I mean, there's no way that any judge in the open classes would even look at me. And it's not supposed to be that way, but that's the reality of it. So now, Western dressage, you can show up with a quarter horse, and it's really, really interesting. It's something that I've always felt was true. It really speaks to the overlap between dressage and Western. And so, there's a lot of common elements. So, it's like instead of the working trot, you do the working jog, which is like a gait that's going somewhere, but you can do it all day. So it takes like the comfort of rider in consideration. When you do at the higher levels of Western dressage, when you do the instead of the turn on the haunches, you're supposed to do the pivot, which the classical dressage people, think, oh my God, that's terrible. The pivot, the horse like loses the purity of the gait. And just pivots around the inside hindfoot. With this, I will say, well, it's like if you're working a cow or whatever, it's like you can gain a lot of speed around that inside hindfoot. Whereas if you're keeping the purity of gait and the inside hindfoot keeps stepping like in a correct turn of the haunches, and the cow will be long gone by the time you do the turn. So, that is the nod to the Western tradition. But to me, like the common elements are still so much more important. Like, whether you're doing a pivot or a turn on the haunches, the horse has to be now moving like in fluidity and
Can you hear me?
Oh, there you are. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I can hear you now. Yeah, that's probably my computer. The window just closed. But so to me, like Western dressage is like this effort, on like a small group of idealistic people, made that happen, and they looked at, this is like what a good dressage horse, a good Western horse, but this is what a good horse should go like, and we're doing it. And there's levels just like in classical dressage, but there's like a lot more effort to be positive in the comments. I mean, I've picked up comment sheets from classical dressage tests that just leave me like crying and utterly crushed, because I'm like, I will never be any good. In Western dressage, judges generally try to be a little bit more positive about stuff, so that's all very good. And you can show up with a smaller horse, and that doesn't have those spectacular gaits, and you can do well, and you can do all those movements, and and I think that's a really, really positive thing.
Yes, ma'am. Well, we have a small, yeah, we've had a small group around here that's done a couple shows, but I kind of think they did a show or two for a year or two, and I don't know that they're still active at all. But again, that would be the sort of thing that I would like to go play with a little bit, I think. And I do think you hit on one of those things. I bang this drum. Yeah, I bang this drum all the time, but I think really the detriment of all of these things comes down to the judging. If the judges are there to be the standard holders, and if they allow Western pleasure horses to lope around at half of a mile an hour with their nose 4 inches off of the ground, and they reward that and let it win, then that's what you're going to get. And the same with dressage. If they won't even look at a horse that's not the right combination of breeds, or 17 hands plus, or all of that sort of stuff, and the judges are the ones that are being discouraging rather than encouraging and educational to people, then they're really the ones that wind up ruining it for everybody. So I don't know what we ever get done with that. I know it's probably as difficult or more difficult in the dressage world to become a judge as it is in any other. But to your point, like I know a dressage judge.
Oh, it's really hard.
Yeah, I know a dressage judge reasonably well around here, and I've seen her ride. And if she were to give me a negative comment on my exhibition, I probably would just laugh it off rather than take it to heart and cry. So not all judges are what they're cracked up to be. I'll just say that. But I don't know how we fix that.
I know.
Yeah.
I know, but it's, I think, yeah, to your point, though, I mean, I think it's not just the judges. I mean, I've talked to judges about this, and they say, well, we can only judge what we see. And then, of course, there's, breeders and owners and people who buy horses. Like everybody's like, okay, so, it's like we can only like we have to breed the horses that people will buy and the horses that will win. And we have to, like trainers have to like choose the horses that they think will do well. I mean, that's where I just don't want to be like a mainly show trainer anymore, because I don't want to go that right. I don't want to say, okay, like I'm going to focus on the horses that can do well and win the ribbons and win the medals. It's like, no, I think dressage really is a very democratic democratic kind of a thing to do with a horse, that it's even more beneficial to a horse that maybe doesn't have a ton of natural talent, and not a ton of trainers falling all over themselves to get to work with that horse. And that is what makes me happy when I get a horse that other people have maybe given up on and saying, oh, this is not a good horse, and then you can unlock the potential, and then they turn out to be really nice. So, it's not just the judges, it's like an industry-wide thing. Like once you get into the showing mindset where more is always better, and you have the standards, it's like, well, with Western Pleasure, I'm sure it started out, in the 1970s or whenever, as something perfectly reasonable. There's a relaxed horse going down the rail in a nice, comfortable jog and lope. And then it's like, okay, so the horse that's slowest always wins, and the head can be a little lower. It's like, oh, my horse's head can be even lower than that. And then pretty soon you had what it evolved into, which isn't pretty anymore. In which nobody really wants to see.
Yeah.
And I think in dressage, there's something similar happening. I'm working on an article where that's going to ruffle some feathers about, Western Pleasure and dressage, and the similarities that I see, where it's more and more about the picture that's presented. And if you're not corresponding to that picture as an exhibitor, then, it's like there's no sense in even being in that ring. And, it's partly the tack and the outfit and all of that in dressage as in Western Pleasure, but it's more than anything the horse's way of going. It's the conformation and the way of going. It's in the Western Pleasure, that very flat knee and flat hock where they have no up and down going on at all. In dressage, it's that big overstep and that not even functional, those huge trots and huge canters. And that's also something a little bit problematic, because it's not conducive to long-term soundness, and it's not conducive to really solid training that respects the horse's individual personality and the horse's aging progress and all of that. So I think it's a bigger problem, and it has to do with with showing and people just getting super competitive about it.
Couldn't agree more, and that's all the big part of why I choose not to have a whole lot to do with that world. But hopefully we wind up with some of these things like working equitation and Western dressage that maybe they haven't been ruined yet. How about we'll put it that way? Maybe 20 years from now they're just as guilty, but I hope new things keep coming out that are still fresh and still stay true to the classics, because classics never go out of style, right? I used to, one of the trainers that I apprenticed under was one that was very guilty of what you're talking about. Whenever a horse he'd get a call about one for training, he wanted to see the papers, and if the papers didn't suit him, then he wasn't even interested in trying the horse. And I always thought that was just absolutely ridiculous, but it was the way he wanted to run his business, but it's certainly not the way I want to run mine. So anyway.
Right. Yeah, no, I totally see that. And with the competitive stuff, it's back to what I was saying earlier about running the ultramarathons. I think if we can get a little bit more of that mindset of like, look, like to me, shows like are, the times that I've loved showing, and it's like, there are shows that I've really enjoyed. It's like, it's more of like the celebration, the sense of community. It's like, look, we're here together on a weekend showing our beautiful horses, and there's going to be somebody who wins and somebody who doesn't, but at the end of the day, that's not the most important thing. Like, can we maybe do that? Can we maybe get there? And not involve a gazillion dollars of prize money, and make it a little bit more playful, and where people just use it like, look, this is what we're doing together, and it's a really great thing we get to do it.
Yeah, you're supposed to be competing against yourself in the end. I know there have been times I won a show and I was very disappointed in my horse. The run did not go the way I wanted it to go. He was not with me, and I don't know what the judge was watching. Maybe compared to the other people in the class, my horse was better, but I was not at all pleased. I left that show knowing I had work to do at home, so we should be competing against ourselves and what we know our horse is capable of, maybe not so much against everybody else all the time. So, and I love the idea of being uplifting and
absolutely,
helping other people and all of that. So I think really kind of like the husband trainer that you had to deal with when you were apprenticing. It's just assholes. Assholes are the problem with everything. If we could just get rid of the assholes, then the rest of it would be great,
That would be really nice. That would be very cool.
How do we do that anyway? Well, Katrin, I have
that's a subject for another podcast, Daniel.
Yes, ma'am. I have kept you quite a while. Didn't mean to keep you this late. Tell David I appreciate him.
Oh, it's
Let
been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure, Danielle. David understands.
Yes, ma'am. Well, I do always enjoy getting to chat with you. I hope I get to ride with you soon someday down the road. I might actually have a clinic developing around Santa
Absolutely.
Fe. So if we get that lined up, I'll definitely give you a call and we'll get
Oh, that'd be
together or
fun. I'd
something.
love to see you. Yeah,
Yes,
keep me
ma'am.
posted on it. Okay,
Sure, sure.
absolutely. All
Well,
right,
thank you
sounds good.
again
Well, have a
for
great rest of your evening and great talking. And thanks for having me.
yes, ma'am. And we will have in the show
All
notes
right,
links
we'll
to
talk to
your
you soon. Yeah.
oh, so we'll have in the show notes links to Katrin's website and her books and her Facebook presence and all of that. So thank you all for joining us. If you did like the podcast, we would always appreciate if you'll give us a rating on whatever directory that you happen to be listening to us on, Spotify or Apple Podcast or whatever. And we'll see y'all next week. Thank you much. We'll see you next week for another episode of Adult Onset Horsemanship. I've been your host, Daniel Dolphin.